Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Tonight, we journey into the quiet mystery of the fields, into the drifting summer haze of rural England, where, for centuries, shapes have appeared overnight in tall, ripened crops, as if carefully pressed by an unseen hand. This is the entire history of crop circles, a story that begins long before modern cameras, before the age of satellites and the internet, before most people could even read, and yet has slowly evolved into one of the most persistent and enduring mysteries of the modern world. From an old 1600s tale, whispered in the English countryside, of a strange force flattening a farmer's field under moonlight, all the way to the late 20th century, when vast and intricate geometric formations began emerging across the farmlands of Wiltshire, circles so large they could only be seen properly from the air, and so precise that mathematicians, scientists, artists, engineers, and even spiritual seekers found themselves drawn to investigate. Some have laughed, some have sworn, some have tried to replicate them, and others have simply knelt in the stillness of dawn, inside the silence of a perfect spiral, and asked a quiet question that remains unanswered to this day. Why here? And why at all? Before we begin, I'd love it if you could comment where in the world you're listening from tonight, and what time it is for you right now. It's always extraordinary to see just how many people across every corner of the earth gather together here, not to debate, not to argue, but simply to listen, to wonder, and to fall asleep to the long, quiet unfolding of history. Now, put your phone on Do Not Disturb, settle in, make yourself as comfortable as you can. There is nothing you need to focus on. There is no need to stay awake for every word. This story will carry you either way. Tonight, we begin with the earliest whispers, the first recorded legend, the moment crop circles entered human memory. The first whispers, 17th century Mowing Devil and pre-scientific superstition. The year is 1678. England is a land of long shadows, horse-drawn carts, and candlelit cottages. Most villages are no more than clusters of timber-framed homes surrounded by fields, with narrow lanes winding like threads through hedgerows and pastures. The air carries the faint, earthy scent of straw, soil, and smoke from hearth fires. Night falls in an almost absolute darkness, broken only by the occasional flicker of lantern light or the glow of a distant window. People live intimately with the weather, the seasons, and forces they do not fully understand. Superstition shapes daily life. Illness, sudden misfortune, strange phenomena are attributed to unseen powers, curses, omens, or spirits, because the language of science does not yet exist to explain them. It is in this world that one of the earliest documented accounts of a mysterious circular pattern in a field appears, recorded in a pamphlet widely known today as the Tale of the Mowing Devil. This pamphlet was sold at rural markets, cheaply printed on coarse paper, its cover marked with a crude woodcut depicting a dark, horned figure bending over a field of wheat. The image shows the figure moving its scythe in a perfect sweeping arc, as if deliberately flattening the crops into an exact circular form. The story tells of a farmer in Hertfordshire who, in his frustration with a labourer over the price of harvesting his hay, declared he would rather have the devil himself mow the field than pay the fee. That night, according to the pamphlet, villagers observed a strange glow across the fields. By morning, the field had been flattened into a perfect circle, with the stalks bent smoothly at their bases, not broken or burned, but pressed as though by unseen hands. The pamphlet is sensational, crafted to shock and delight the imagination of rural readers. Yet, it serves an important historical function. It shows that as far back as the late 17th century, people were documenting phenomena that resemble what we now call crop circles. The circle was deliberate, controlled, ordered in a way that could not have resulted from mere wind, animals, or human error. Consider the mindset of villagers in that era. Science, as we understand it, was in its infancy. Electricity was a mystery. Magnetism was barely known. Meteorology existed only in rudimentary observation. People did not think in terms of natural forces operating invisibly over distance. They thought in terms of spirits, omens, and divine or malevolent interference. A perfect circle appearing overnight in a wheat field was not seen as a mystery to be investigated with tools or measurements. It was interpreted as a sign, a message, or a warning from a world beyond human understanding. The pamphlet, with its dramatic illustration, did more than entertain. It influenced how people perceived the landscape around them. Fields became more than places to grow crops. They became potential stages for events outside the normal order of life. It is important to note that the Mowing Devil story was not an isolated report. Other similar tales appear in manuscripts and parish records, often recorded casually as side notes in diaries or local accounts. There are references to strange circles of flattened corn and nightly visitations that left round geometrical patterns in the fields. These reports are often vague, passing mentions, yet they reveal a continuity of perception, that something in the world could create ordered patterns without human hands. What strikes historians is the specificity of these accounts. The emphasis is always on shape and symmetry. The field is never merely trampled or damaged. It is flattened into a precise formation. The story of the Mowing Devil emphasizes a circular pattern, but other accounts hint at straight lines, arcs, and spirals. The shapes are significant, for they reveal a human tendency to notice order in the otherwise chaotic natural world. And in a society steeped in superstition, order meant meaning. These earliest accounts also show a fascinating relationship between humans and the land. In the 17th century, certain areas of England were considered to have their own inherent spirits or powers. Meadows, groves, and hills were not simply property, they were semi-sacred. Certain stones could not be moved, certain trees could not be cut, and certain fields, once touched by strange events, were treated with caution or reverence. A perfectly flattened circle in wheat was not only a curiosity, but potentially a site of influence from forces beyond comprehension. Farmers often avoided stepping into such formations. Travelers would speak softly when passing them. Children were warned not to disturb them. The events were observed, remembered, and carefully retold, but rarely questioned in terms of cause and effect. It is worth imagining the villagers themselves. A night with moonlight shimmering across wheat, the sudden appearance of a glow in the fields, and by morning, a perfect circle pressed into the earth. No footprints, no evidence of human entry, no known natural cause. The mind of a 17th century English farmer would leap immediately to explanations that made sense within his worldview. The devil, fairies, angels, or some restless spirit. There was no reason to suspect mechanical ingenuity, aerial observation, or deliberate human fabrication. Such concepts would have seemed impossible. The world beyond human sight was filled with active forces, some benevolent, some dangerous. These accounts also suggest a remarkable oral culture. Stories of circular patterns in crops were transmitted verbally from neighbor to neighbor, from parent to child, often long before they were ever written down. A farmer might recount to his son the time he woke to a field flattened into a perfect circle, and warned him to respect the land and the spirits therein. A traveler passing through a village might hear whispers of mysterious lights or shapes at the edges of distant fields. In many ways, the circulation of these tales across counties laid the groundwork for centuries of folklore, and eventually a fascination with the unexplained that persists to this day. It is also worth noting that while the Mowing Devil pamphlet is the earliest widely cited printed account, similar motifs appear across other European records. In Germany, France, and parts of Scandinavia, chroniclers mention strange marks in grain that appeared overnight. Often, these accounts are linked to moral warnings or omens. Fields flattened in perfect shapes were interpreted as portents, warnings of famine, disease, or divine displeasure. The emphasis on moral or supernatural consequence reflects the worldview of the time. The universe was moral as well as physical, and patterns in the natural world carried meaning. The stories suggest that the fascination with circles is older than industrialization, older than flight, older than electricity. It is rooted in the human recognition of geometry and order in nature. A circle is complete. It is balanced. It is symmetrical in a way that humans find instinctively significant. To encounter one unexpectedly, pressed into a familiar field of wheat, is to encounter something outside human agency, yet remarkably precise. Even centuries ago, people were noting this precision and attaching meaning to it. By the close of the 17th century, the Mowing Devil story had become more than a single pamphlet. It existed in multiple forms: oral retelling, handwritten diary notes, casual mentions in parish records. Each retelling amplified the mystery. Each eyewitness, whether distant or first-hand, added detail or interpretation. Some villagers emphasized the glowing apparition. Others focused on the immaculate symmetry of the circle. Some viewed it as playful, others as threatening. The pattern persisted not only in fields, but in human memory. It was catalogued, examined, and carried forward, though always within the frameworks available to the time: superstition, faith, and observation, rather than scientific inquiry. This period also shows the early beginnings of skepticism. Not all witnesses were credulous. Some questioned the pamphlet's accuracy. Some suggested that mischief makers might have caused the pattern. Yet the limitations of human ability, combined with the lack of mechanized tools, made such practical explanations difficult to imagine. It is one thing to suggest that men with scythes could create a circular pattern in wheat, another entirely to suggest it could appear overnight, uniformly pressed across a field. These early debates echo those that would persist centuries later. How much can human hands accomplish, and where does the boundary between natural and supernatural truly lie? As we reflect on these earliest accounts, several threads become clear. First, the appearance of circles in crops is a phenomenon recognized across time and space. Second, these formations were remarkable enough to be documented and retold for generations. Third, humans instinctively attribute order and meaning to these patterns, linking them to forces beyond the ordinary. And fourth, these earliest reports reveal a careful interplay between observation, imagination, and cultural worldview. The stories are not mere fantasies, but attempts to interpret an inexplicable experience within the knowledge available at the time. By the late 17th century, the first whispers of crop circles had begun their long journey into human consciousness. They would survive through centuries of oral tradition, sporadic documentation, and local legend. Each retelling preserved the essential mystery: a perfect circle, pressed into ripening grain, appearing without explanation. Not burned, not trampled, not chaotic, ordered, precise. A silent pattern that captured the human imagination long before anyone had a word for the forces that could create it. And in this way, from the glowing night of Hertfordshire to countless fields across England, the phenomenon entered human memory, a quiet, haunting legacy that would persist until the age of modern observation, investigation, and fascination. It was the beginning of a story that would continue to unfold for centuries, leaving both the land and the imagination forever changed. Silent patterns in the English countryside, earliest documented rural folklore. Long before modern observers, before photography, newspapers, or scientific study, the English countryside was already steeped in stories of strange circles appearing in fields. These were not tales of spectacle meant for the wider world. They were whispered among neighbours, remembered in village kitchens, and passed carefully from parent to child. They existed in a space between memory and imagination, where humans tried to understand a world that often defied explanation. In the rolling hills of Wiltshire, Somerset, and Hampshire, where the land rises and falls in gentle swells and ancient hedgerows trace the edges of fields, patterns in crops were regarded with a mixture of curiosity and quiet caution. Unlike towns or cities, where the rhythm of life is constrained by walls, roads, and marketplaces, the countryside opens itself to the sky and wind. Fields stretch unbroken across horizons. Each season, each wind, each rainfall shapes them. And sometimes, inexplicably, the land appears to shape itself. These early accounts rarely mention specifics of timing or witnesses, but they reveal the mindset of the people who observed them. Crops flattened in a perfect circle were extraordinary, but not necessarily threatening. They were anomalous yet ordered, impossible to attribute to ordinary forces. Villagers rarely recorded them in writing, and when they did, it was in letters, diaries, or small notes in parish records. Often, the language was cautious. A scribe might describe corn laid in circles as though pressed by some unseen hand, or refer to whirls in the wheat appearing overnight, without claiming knowledge of their cause. The oral transmission of these stories was perhaps even more influential. Families, tending their land from dawn to dusk, would notice changes after a night spent asleep. A shepherd returning from the hills might report seeing a round patch, perfectly flat, as if the earth itself had swept it with a brush. Children, curious and observant, would recount such events in hushed tones at the dinner table, often exaggerating small details, building the story into something that lingered in memory. By the time another generation heard it, the event might be centuries old, yet it retained a singular clarity, a perfect circle in the field, appearing without explanation. The cultural context of these stories is essential. In pre-industrial England, the boundary between the natural and supernatural was porous. The world was alive with presences, invisible currents, and forces beyond human control. Trees, stones, and hills were often considered sentient or inhabited by spirits. Strange lights in the sky, unusual weather patterns, and unexpected phenomena in fields were interpreted in this context. Crops pressed into circles were viewed as signs, sometimes benevolent, sometimes cautionary. Farmers would avoid walking through the patterns, believing that doing so might bring misfortune or invite the attention of the unseen. Different regions developed their own interpretations. In some areas, circles were connected to fairies or elemental spirits. These were small, secretive forces believed to inhabit the land. In other regions, they were linked to omens, portents of coming storms, poor harvests, or sudden illness. The same phenomena could be interpreted in multiple ways depending on local customs, religious beliefs, and the particular temperament of the storyteller. This multiplicity of interpretations helped the stories survive across generations. They were adaptable, capable of absorbing new details without losing their essence. The role of landscape itself cannot be understated. The geography of southern England, rolling chalk hills, valleys dotted with streams, and expanses of arable land, made the appearance of circular patterns particularly striking. A flattened patch of wheat or barley, perfectly round and unbroken, contrasts sharply with the surrounding stalks, which remain upright and sway with the wind. The visual clarity of the pattern, especially when viewed from a slight rise in the land, made it impossible to dismiss. Even without aerial observation, villagers could perceive the symmetry and regularity of the shape, and the human mind instinctively registers these geometric anomalies as meaningful. By the 18th century, the oral tradition had expanded beyond simple eyewitness reports. Storytellers began weaving circles into local mythologies. A circle in a field might be described as the resting place of a wandering spirit, or as the mark left by an invisible visitor performing its nightly rounds. Some accounts link the patterns to celestial events, suggesting that certain formations appeared only after particular alignments of the moon or stars. While these connections were speculative, they reveal a consistent attempt to integrate the mysterious circles into a coherent worldview, one in which the visible and invisible, the earthly and the divine, constantly intersected. One recurring theme in early folklore is the presence of sound or light associated with the formation of circles. Villagers sometimes reported hearing a low hum, a rustling, or a subtle vibration at night before discovering a circle in the morning. Others noted faint glows over fields during moonlit nights, which were sometimes attributed to spirits, witches, or angels. These details, repeated in oral and written accounts, suggest that the phenomenon was not always silent or visually discrete in people's memories. Instead, it was multisensory, experienced in subtle ways that reinforced the sense of wonder and unease. The careful avoidance of direct confrontation with these patterns is particularly telling. Villagers rarely attempted to alter or destroy the circles. They harvested around them, leaving the formations intact until the crop naturally decayed. Children were warned to stay away. Travelers would step lightly through a field, avoiding flattened patches entirely. This behavior demonstrates an instinctive reverence for the unknown. It also ensured that the patterns remained preserved long enough to enter memory and legend, a practice that allowed the stories to survive well beyond the event itself. Written records from this era, while sparse, corroborate oral accounts. Parish registers occasionally include passing mentions of corn laid in circles by night, or note that a field appeared to have been mown by invisible hands. Diaries of gentry and estate managers, often more concerned with agricultural productivity than folklore, sometimes comment on the inexplicable efficiency of such events. A crop flattened in perfect symmetry, without human intervention. Even in the absence of scientific understanding, these observers recognized the extraordinary nature of the formations. By the early 19th century, as literacy increased and newspapers began circulating more widely, reports of circular patterns in fields slowly transitioned from localized folklore to recorded anecdote. These early publications often treated the events with caution, blending factual observation with moral or supernatural commentary. For instance, a reporter might describe a circle appearing in a barley field, then suggest that it was a divine sign, a warning of poor weather, or the work of mischievous spirits. The tone of the reports was never purely skeptical. The phenomenon remained mysterious, even when writers sought rational explanations. Throughout this period, the phenomenon retained its connection to human perception of the natural world. Fields were not inert. Crops, wind, and moonlight created a living canvas. The appearance of circles, whether caused by natural forces, human hands, or some unknown factor, resonated deeply because it intersected with long-standing beliefs about the agency of the landscape. Symmetry, geometry, and sudden alteration of the familiar were immediately noticed and remembered. The circles were both an aesthetic surprise and a cultural signifier, connecting everyday labor with the extraordinary, the mundane with the unseen. By blending folklore, oral tradition, and early record-keeping, the rural English landscape of the 17th through 19th centuries became a living archive of these mysterious patterns. Villagers, shepherds, and travelers all contributed to the continuity of memory, ensuring that each new circle was contextualized within centuries of precedent. Each account, each passing observation, reinforced the perception that the land itself was capable of remarkable, unexplained action. And so, long before the era of scientific inquiry, cameras, and aerial surveys, the first enduring stories of crop circles were quietly taking root in the imagination of England. They existed not in headlines, but in whispered warnings, careful observation, and attentive memory. Each circle became a small node in a vast, invisible network of human experience, linking the land, the sky, and the imagination in ways that would endure for centuries. Through these silent patterns, the English countryside taught its observers to look, to remember, and to acknowledge the unknown. The circles were not merely shapes in a field, they were invitations to notice, to question, and to carry forward the memory of something extraordinary, even when the cause remained invisible. In this way, folklore and observation merged seamlessly, laying the foundation for a fascination that would one day expand beyond the borders of England, capturing the curiosity of the entire world. Strange formations reappear. The 1960s UFO panic era begins. By the mid-20th century, the quiet and largely unnoticed phenomenon of crop circles began to re-emerge in a very different England. The countryside was still dotted with villages and open fields, but the world was changing rapidly. Cars traveled along winding country lanes, electricity illuminated homes, and news from distant lands arrived in a matter of hours. At the same time, the imagination of the public had expanded, fueled by new scientific achievements, space exploration, and growing curiosity about the unknown. In this environment, the mysterious patterns that had appeared centuries earlier quietly began to return, now noticed by a wider audience. Reports of circles in crops became more frequent during the 1960s. While some formations were simple and small, gradually more elaborate patterns began to appear. Farmers and locals observed fields of barley and wheat flattened overnight, perfectly circular or occasionally forming more complex shapes. Unlike earlier centuries, there were now cameras, journalists, and investigators ready to record and document unusual occurrences. The precision of the formations was striking, and their sudden overnight appearance defied easy explanation. People noticed that these were not random patches of trampling. The geometry suggested care and intentionality, as if an invisible hand had shaped the plants with deliberate purpose. Wiltshire, long known for its connection to ancient folklore, became a central focus. Farmers reported large circular formations appearing suddenly in their fields, sometimes accompanied by faint, unexplained lights in the sky. A single UFO might be observed hovering in the distance, or multiple craft could be glimpsed during the night. Though fleeting and difficult to verify, these sightings were consistently paired with the appearance of the circles, establishing a pattern that sparked speculation. Observers began to wonder if some connection existed between the mysterious aerial phenomena and the formations in the fields below. The cultural climate of the 1960s played a key role in shaping these interpretations. This was a decade of fascination with space travel, science fiction, and the possibility of intelligent life beyond Earth. Television, cinema, and literature frequently explored encounters with advanced beings and technologies. When unusual patterns appeared on the ground in tandem with reports of a UFO or unidentified craft, the public imagination naturally drew connections. The long-standing rural tradition of mysterious circles intersected with a modern narrative that something from the skies might leave its mark on the earth. Witnesses reported subtle but curious experiences around the formations. Some described faint humming or whirring sounds in the night, while others noted a sudden silence in the surrounding area, with birds and animals behaving unusually. Some reported seeing lights over a field just before discovering a circle in the morning. These sensory details added layers of mystery, reinforcing the idea that the formations were not simply random or the result of human mischief. The connection to the skies, even if speculative, gave observers a sense that something larger, intelligent, and unknown might be at work. Farmers and landowners had varied reactions. Some were intrigued, welcoming visitors or journalists to observe the formations, while others were wary, concerned about crop damage and trespassing. Nevertheless, the phenomenon could not be ignored. Reports of circles appeared in neighboring villages, and over time, patterns were noted across multiple counties. The recurring appearance of these formations, combined with occasional sightings of a UFO or multiple craft, suggested persistence and a phenomenon that transcended isolated incidents. Amateur researchers and enthusiasts began documenting the circles in greater detail. They measured diameters, noted geometric arrangements, and photographed the formations whenever possible. Some attempted to correlate the timing of circles with reports of a UFO or unidentified craft in the area. The precision and regularity of certain patterns, some stretching across entire fields with multiple interconnected circles, seemed impossible to replicate quickly by human hands. This drew increasing attention and debate about the origin of the formations. During this period, the appearance of crop circles also coincided with a broader societal fascination with the unexplained. The 1960s were a decade of alternative spirituality, experimentation, and curiosity about hidden forces in the natural world. Crop circles became part of that exploration, offering a tangible example of something strange and ordered appearing in familiar landscapes. People were intrigued by the combination of natural beauty, geometric precision, and hints of the mysterious. Even without definitive explanation, the circles captured imaginations, prompting reflection on the boundaries between the known and the unknown. Documentation remained a challenge. There were no drones, no satellite imagery, and photography was limited in quality and availability. Observers relied on careful notes, sketches, and amateur photography to capture the formations. Even with these constraints, the circles were consistently described as symmetrical, deliberate, and often breathtaking in scale. Farmers and witnesses alike marveled at the way the plants were bent at their bases, sometimes showing twisted nodes or slight burns at the stalk's junctions, details difficult to explain by simple mechanical means. By the end of the 1960s, crop circles had re-established themselves as a phenomenon, both fascinating and enigmatic. They had moved beyond local folklore to become observed events documented with increasing rigor. Circles appeared in multiple counties, sometimes associated with a UFO or multiple craft in the sky, always leaving observers with the same question: how and by whom or what were they created? The resurgence of formations during this era laid the foundation for the next stage of fascination: sustained media attention, scientific inquiry, and the integration of crop circles into a broader cultural narrative about mystery, intelligence, and the unknown. What had once been quietly observed in the English countryside was now becoming a phenomenon with regional and eventually global significance. In this way, the 1960s marked a turning point. Crop circles were no longer isolated oddities or the subject of whispered superstition. They were now connected to wider cultural currents: fascination with space, speculation about intelligent forces beyond Earth, and a growing public willingness to consider the extraordinary. The circles had returned, and this time their impact would be long-lasting, drawing the eyes of curious observers to the fields and the skies above, seeking meaning in the silent patterns pressed into the land. From local oddities to worldwide rumors, early newspaper mentions of mysterious rings. By the early 1970s, crop circles had begun moving beyond the quiet rural folklore of English villages and stepping into the pages of newspapers. What had once been whispered stories, carefully preserved in oral tradition or parish records, was now documented for public consumption. The appearance of mysterious circles in fields captured the attention of journalists, farmers, and the curious alike, turning local oddities into phenomena discussed across counties and eventually reported in other countries. The printed word gave authority to what had previously been anecdotal, and the stories began to circulate far more widely than ever before. The earliest accounts in newspapers often took a careful, measured approach. Editors described flattened fields, noting the symmetry and the scale of the patterns without speculating overtly on their origin. Headlines might read, "Mysterious circle appears in Wiltshire field," or "Unexplained pattern found in barley crop." The text would focus on observation: the shape, the diameter, the condition of the plants. Farmers were frequently quoted, remarking on the suddenness of the phenomenon and the impossibility of human creation overnight. Some noted faint lights over the fields in the preceding hours, suggesting the possible presence of a UFO or unidentified craft. Others reported no signs of human activity, no footprints or tool marks, emphasizing the mystery rather than conjecture. Regional newspapers soon began referencing earlier reports from neighboring towns, noting similarities between separate incidents. Circles seemed to appear with a pattern. During summer nights, often following periods of unusual weather, and typically in fields of wheat or barley. Observers began to document clusters of formations, sometimes noting that the shapes were connected by straight lines or arcs, or that a single night could produce multiple formations across a large area. Where once a single, isolated circle might have been treated as curiosity, now a growing body of reports suggested persistence, repetition, and possibly intention behind the patterns. The visual aspect of newspaper coverage played a significant role in capturing public attention. Even rudimentary photographs or diagrams allowed readers to see the scale, precision, and geometry of the formations. Some images depicted simple, single circles, while others captured multiple shapes forming sequences or connected designs across fields. For many readers, the visual evidence created a striking impression, bringing the phenomenon to life in a way that words alone could not. The public could now imagine the size of the formations, the sharpness of their edges, and the unnatural perfection of their geometry. Letters from readers further expanded the perception of crop circles. Farmers, travelers, and enthusiasts wrote in with accounts from distant locations, sometimes describing formations hundreds of miles from the original reported fields. These accounts occasionally mentioned seeing a UFO in the sky or observing multiple craft during the night. Even when editors treated these letters cautiously, the collective effect reinforced the impression of a widespread, recurring phenomenon. The circles were no longer a curiosity isolated to Wiltshire or Hampshire. They were beginning to seem global, or at least capable of appearing anywhere with suitable fields. International newspapers and magazines began picking up on the story as well. Reports in the United States, Australia, and parts of Europe referenced the English accounts, occasionally adding new observations from local regions. Some articles explicitly linked the appearance of crop circles to a UFO or unidentified craft seen in the sky, often noting the suddenness of the formations in relation to sightings. The connection between the ground and the skies created a compelling narrative, a tangible, earthly pattern seemingly connected to mysterious aerial activity. Even when evidence of a craft was scarce, the mere suggestion was enough to capture the imagination of readers far beyond England. As coverage expanded, some journalists attempted to investigate the phenomenon scientifically. Reports included commentary from agricultural experts, meteorologists, and geologists who proposed tentative explanations ranging from weather effects to soil compaction. Others considered human involvement, suggesting pranks or art projects. Yet the recurring precision, scale, and symmetry of the formations often resisted simple explanation. Patterns appearing overnight, sometimes in remote fields, or extending across several hundred meters, challenged conventional reasoning. Observers began noting that the crops were bent at their bases rather than broken, or that nodes appeared swollen, details difficult to reconcile with casual human effort. The public reaction was a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and fascination. Some saw the circles as a whimsical mystery, a modern folklore taking shape in the fields. Others interpreted them as possible signs of extraterrestrial intelligence, especially when a UFO or multiple craft were reported. Farmers sometimes welcomed curious visitors or researchers, while others were wary, concerned about trespassers or crop damage. Nevertheless, the phenomenon could no longer be ignored, and the newspaper coverage created a feedback loop. Stories drew readers, readers reported new circles, and the cycle of observation and documentation continued. The written record also allowed for comparisons across time and space. By examining multiple reports, journalists and researchers began noting recurring features: concentric circles, spirals, occasional lines connecting formations, and the unexplained flattening of crops without obvious human intervention. Even without modern tools, these early reports created a rudimentary archive, enabling the first steps toward pattern recognition and analysis. The circles could now be traced over months, years, and across regions, laying the foundation for more systematic study in the decades to come. Crucially, newspapers of this era often maintained careful language. Editors avoided sensationalism, focusing on what could be observed rather than speculated upon. While the occasionally UFO was mentioned, the emphasis remained on the patterns themselves: the shapes, the symmetry, the precision. This approach allowed readers to engage with the phenomenon critically, weighing evidence without being overwhelmed by exaggeration. It also lent credibility to the idea that crop circles were worthy of attention, both from curious citizens and from the scientific community. By the late 1970s, the combination of local observation, letters from readers, visual documentation, and regional reporting had elevated crop circles from mere rural oddities into phenomena of wider cultural and scientific interest. They were no longer confined to whispered tales in village kitchens. They had become tangible events documented in print, reaching audiences far beyond the fields in which they appeared. The stories of circles were now part of a larger dialogue about mystery, observation, and the possible interaction between the Earth and the unknown. Through newspaper coverage, crop circles became a shared experience, bridging geography, social class, and even national borders. A farmer in Wiltshire, a curious reader in London, and an enthusiast in Sydney could all engage with the same story, each forming their own impression and contributing to the growing network of observation and speculation. The phenomenon had moved from local folklore into collective consciousness, laying the groundwork for the intense public fascination, debate, and investigation that would dominate the following decades. By transforming quiet, localized oddities into globally shared stories, newspapers ensured that crop circles would not fade into obscurity. Each report, photograph, or letter added weight to the mystery, reinforcing the sense that these formations were persistent, recurring, and not easily explained. What had once been whispered among neighbors was now documented for posterity, leaving a record for future generations of observers, researchers, and dreamers who would continue to ponder the origin, purpose, and meaning of these silent, perfect patterns pressed into the land. The UFO Leap, crop circles, enter the extraterrestrial imagination. As the 1970s progressed, the phenomenon of crop circles began to take a dramatic turn. What had once been primarily local curiosities, reported in newspapers and whispered in village parlors, began to intersect with a growing cultural fascination with unexplained aerial phenomena. For the first time, some observers began linking the mysterious formations in fields to the possibility of visitors from beyond the Earth. A single UFO might be seen hovering in the night sky above a freshly flattened crop, or multiple craft glimpsed moving silently over rural landscapes. While these sightings were fleeting and often difficult to verify, the association captured the public imagination and marked the beginning of a new phase in the story of crop circles, the leap from terrestrial oddity to extraterrestrial speculation. This shift did not happen overnight. It was the result of a convergence of factors: widespread media coverage of unidentified craft sightings, a culture increasingly fascinated by space exploration and the possibility of life beyond Earth, and the growing visibility of precise, often elaborate formations in fields. Observers noticed that some circles seemed to appear in areas previously associated with reports of unusual lights or unidentified craft. Even when no craft was reported, the geometry of the formations suggested a level of precision that seemed to many beyond simple human execution. This perception encouraged a new narrative. Perhaps these patterns were not merely hoaxes or natural anomalies, but messages or signs originating from an intelligence beyond our world. The imagination of the public, fueled by films, television, and literature exploring contact with extraterrestrial beings, quickly embraced this connection. Circles were no longer just geometric curiosities. They became potential evidence of intelligence operating in ways humans could not yet comprehend. Authors and journalists began to speculate openly about the link between the earthbound formations and the skies above. Some suggested that the circles could be landing markers for an unseen craft. Others proposed that the designs themselves might encode information, a kind of cosmic language left for humans to decipher. Witnesses described the experience of discovering a crop circle with a sense of awe, sometimes tinged with fear. They reported unusual atmospheric phenomena, a sudden hush over the surrounding landscape, a faint electrical charge in the air, or a low hum that seemed to emanate from the formation itself. A single UFO might appear in the distance, a bright light hovering for moments before disappearing. In rarer cases, observers reported multiple craft, moving silently across the night sky, only to vanish without trace. The combination of visual spectacle and tangible earthbound patterns created a powerful impression that something beyond ordinary human perception was at work. Scholars and amateur researchers began to examine the geometric properties of the formations in greater detail. They noted the complexity of some circles, concentric rings, radial spokes, spirals, and occasionally intricate patterns resembling mathematical curves or fractals. The precision and scale suggested planning and intent, reinforcing the idea that an intelligence, whether human or otherwise, had created them. When combined with reports of a UFO or multiple craft in the vicinity, some began to argue that these formations were not simply terrestrial creations, but a form of communication from visitors beyond the planet. Cultural fascination intensified as stories spread beyond England. International reports of crop circles, sometimes appearing near significant archaeological sites or in remote agricultural regions, drew comparisons to the English formations. Accounts frequently mentioned the presence of an unidentified craft, sometimes hovering silently, sometimes glimpsed briefly before disappearing. These observations fueled speculation that crop circles were part of a global phenomenon, suggesting intelligence and intention extending far beyond a single field or region. Skeptics emerged as well, cautioning against hasty conclusions. Some pointed to human pranksters or local artists attempting to mimic the circles seen in newspapers. Others suggested natural causes, from wind patterns to soil anomalies. Yet, even skeptics had to acknowledge the challenge posed by the most elaborate formations. Large-scale patterns with perfect geometry appearing overnight, in fields where access was difficult and human presence seemed unlikely. The recurring association with sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft lent a further layer of intrigue, resisting simple dismissal. Observers also began to document the subtle effects associated with these formations. Some reported changes in plant structure, nodes twisted or elongated in ways inconsistent with normal growth, or crops bent in smooth arcs without breaking. Others noted strange magnetic readings near the formations, or unexplained anomalies in the soil. In combination with sightings of a UFO or multiple craft, these details contributed to the perception that crop circles were a product of advanced intelligence, operating through mechanisms beyond current human understanding. The media played a central role in cementing the connection between circles and visitors from beyond Earth. Journalists, documentary makers, and magazine writers highlighted reports of craft sightings in conjunction with crop formations, often presenting both as part of a single, mysterious phenomenon. Even when evidence was anecdotal or incomplete, the narrative took hold in the public imagination. Crop circles became more than curiosity. They became symbols of mystery, intelligence, and the possibility of communication from beyond the planet. By the end of the 1970s, the perception of crop circles had irrevocably shifted. no longer simply unexplained marks in fields. They were now interpreted by many as potential evidence of extraterrestrial activity. The appearance of a single UFO over a freshly pressed formation, or multiple craft moving silently in the night sky, added drama and plausibility to the speculation. Researchers, enthusiasts, and casual observers began to study formations not only for their geometry, but for their possible meaning, considering the patterns as messages, markers, or signals from beyond Earth. Even today, reviewing reports from this period, one can sense the wonder that observers felt. Stepping into a field to find a perfect circle, sometimes aligned with others or forming a larger pattern, was described as a surreal experience. Add to that the brief sighting of a single UFO or multiple craft, and the impression of intelligence, deliberate, purposeful, and beyond human understanding, became almost impossible to ignore. The leap from a terrestrial oddity to a potential extraterrestrial encounter had been made, and it transformed the way the phenomenon would be perceived, discussed, and investigated for decades to come. This era marked the beginning of a new chapter in the story of crop circles. The circles were no longer solely the domain of folklore or pranksters. They had entered the realm of cosmic speculation. Observers now considered the possibility that these silent, symmetrical patterns pressed into the earth were messages, symbols, or signs left by intelligence from beyond the planet. The phenomenon had grown in scope, ambition, and significance, setting the stage for the extraordinary surge in formations and media attention that would dominate the following decade. The Wiltshire Triangle, Avebury, Silbury Hill, ancient energy hotspots. Nestled in the rolling hills of southern England lies a region that has long drawn attention, for reasons that extend beyond its picturesque landscapes. Wiltshire, with its gently undulating fields, scattered villages, and ancient monuments, became a focal point for crop circle activity in the latter half of the 20th century. Within this county, a specific area emerged as a hotspot, the so-called Wiltshire Triangle, a loosely defined region encompassing the prehistoric sites of Avebury, Silbury Hill, and the surrounding countryside. The term itself was coined by enthusiasts noting that a remarkable concentration of crop formations occurred within its boundaries, suggesting a pattern, a focus, or perhaps a significance that went beyond mere coincidence. Avebury, with its immense stone circles, is one of the oldest and most mysterious monuments in the British Isles. Unlike the more famous Stonehenge, Avebury remains expansive, with massive stones set in circular patterns, encompassing a village and farmland. For centuries, the stones have inspired awe, speculation, and legend. Silbury Hill, a man-made chalk mound nearby, rises from the earth with a smooth, conical profile, its purpose remaining a mystery even to modern archaeologists. The hill is the largest prehistoric man-made mound in Europe, its interior unexplored and enigmatic. Within the context of crop circle activity, these ancient sites were far from incidental. Observers noted that formations frequently appeared in proximity to these monuments, sometimes aligning with paths, sightlines, or the geometric axes connecting the stones. The notion of energy hotspots emerged from these observations. Researchers and enthusiasts proposed that certain locations in Wiltshire possessed an unusual concentration of subtle forces, magnetic anomalies, or ley lines, invisible pathways of energy connecting ancient sites across the landscape. Crop circles often appeared near these lines, as though they were responding to, or perhaps guided by, forces beyond human perception. While science could not verify these claims definitively, the correlation was striking enough to attract attention. A formation would appear overnight in a barley field, perfectly circular and precisely oriented, sometimes mirroring the geometry of nearby ancient monuments. To observers, this seemed far too precise to be random. Witnesses frequently reported other curious phenomena in the Wiltshire Triangle. Some described unusual atmospheric effects, sudden mists rolling through valleys, faint glows over distant fields, or shifts in temperature that seemed localized to the immediate area of the formation. The occasional UFO was sighted hovering in the night sky, a distant light or craft moving slowly before vanishing without sound. In rarer cases, multiple craft were observed, moving in formation across the horizon before disappearing behind the hills. These reports, often documented by local enthusiasts or visiting researchers, added to the aura of mystery surrounding the triangle, reinforcing the perception that these fields were not ordinary farmland, but spaces where unseen forces manifested. The historical significance of Wiltshire added another layer to the phenomenon. Archaeologists have long debated the purpose of Avebury and Silbury Hill, considering them ceremonial centres, astronomical markers, or sites of ritual significance. To those drawn to crop circles, the alignment of formations with these ancient structures suggested continuity, that perhaps the patterns in the fields were part of a dialogue spanning thousands of years. Some enthusiasts proposed that just as the Neolithic builders had inscribed their intentions into the landscape through monumental stones, modern crop formations might be the work of intelligence sensitive to the same energies, communicating through geometry rather than stone. Farmers in the region became accustomed to the occasional curious visitor. Enthusiasts, researchers, and journalists arrived early in the morning, hoping to photograph and document formations before they could be disturbed. Some visitors spoke of feeling a subtle sense of presence, an almost tangible energy emanating from the fields. Animals behaved differently near newly formed circles, with birds and livestock sometimes avoiding the area, adding to the impression that these patterns carried an influence beyond mere physical flattening of crops. Photographs and sketches from this period reveal the extraordinary variety and complexity of formations. Simple circles coexisted with interlocking rings, radial spokes, and occasional spirals of astonishing precision. Observers noted the scale, often spanning tens of meters across, and the meticulous way plants were bent at the base rather than broken. When these formations appeared in proximity to Avebury or Silbury Hill, some researchers speculated that the geometry was intentional, oriented to correspond with the layout of ancient stones, ceremonial axes, or sightlines used by Neolithic builders. The interplay of past and present created a sense of continuity, suggesting that crop circles might be responding to forces or following patterns that have existed in this landscape for millennia. The concept of the Wiltshire Triangle also introduced a sense of pilgrimage. Enthusiasts travelled from across England and abroad, hoping to witness new formations or document patterns before they disappeared. Early researchers meticulously recorded dimensions, orientations, and even the angle at which sunlight fell on the flattened crops. They compared measurements across fields, noting consistency in symmetry and orientation that seemed beyond coincidence. Some formations appeared almost like diagrams, spiraling outward from an invisible center or echoing the layout of nearby stones. These observations fed speculation that intelligence, human or otherwise, was attuned to both the geometry of the land and the history embedded within it. Occasionally, the appearance of a formation was accompanied by reports of a single UFO or multiple craft hovering above the triangle. Observers described bright, silent lights moving in unusual patterns or changing color, then disappearing without trace. These sightings were brief but persistent enough to reinforce the sense that crop circles and aerial phenomena were linked. Even when no craft was seen, the very location of a new circle within the Wiltshire Triangle suggested significance, as if the pattern's position itself was a message, a deliberate choice of site, echoing ancient alignments. As the 1970s drew to a close, the Wiltshire Triangle had established itself as the epicenter of crop circle activity. Its combination of prehistoric monuments, fertile fields, and unexplained phenomena created a unique environment where geometry, landscape, and mystery intersected. Observers increasingly regarded formations here as exceptional, often more intricate or precise than circles found elsewhere. The repeated connection to the triangle, combined with occasional sightings of a UFO or multiple craft, strengthened the perception that some form of intelligence, human, natural, or otherwise, was at work, guided by forces that had been present in the landscape for centuries, if not millennia. In this way, Wiltshire became more than a backdrop. It was a stage on which the mystery of crop circles unfolded. The triangle of Avebury, Silbury Hill, and surrounding countryside formed a nexus of history, energy, and observation, drawing farmers, researchers, and curious visitors into a shared experience of wonder and speculation. The formations themselves, whether simple or complex, carried layers of meaning for those who studied them, linking the patterns pressed into the earth with a long continuum of human history, natural forces, and perhaps intelligence beyond the ordinary. By establishing the Wiltshire Triangle as a focal point, the phenomenon gained structure, direction, and context. It was no longer a series of isolated events. It was a pattern, concentrated and observable, inviting scrutiny and interpretation. The triangle, with its ancient monuments and fertile fields, became the heart of the crop circle mystery, a place where geometry, energy, and history converged, and where the presence of a single UFO or multiple craft could transform a simple, flattened field into a symbol of wonder, speculation, and the enduring human fascination with the unknown. The 1980s, explosion, circles multiply almost overnight. The dawn of the 1980s brought with it a dramatic escalation in the crop circle phenomenon. What had been periodic, occasionally remarkable formations scattered across the English countryside suddenly intensified. Fields that had previously seen a single circle every few weeks or months began to host multiple formations overnight. In some regions, particularly in and around Wiltshire, the density of appearances was extraordinary, giving the impression that the phenomenon had entered a new phase, one of rapid proliferation, audacity, and astonishing precision. Observers, both local and visiting enthusiasts, were astounded. In some cases, farmers awoke to find not a single circle, but several intricate formations stretching across a single field. Others reported multiple shapes appearing in nearby fields simultaneously, as though the land itself had been orchestrated into a geometric symphony while the village slept. The sheer scale and frequency were unlike anything recorded in earlier decades, and the sudden surge drew attention not only from those already aware of crop circles, but from a broader public eager to witness or document the phenomenon. The circles themselves grew increasingly complex. While earlier formations might have been simple single rings or concentric circles, the 1980s introduced elaborate interlocking designs, spirals, and patterns that suggested careful planning and mathematical knowledge. Some formations incorporated symmetry and geometry so precise that observers questioned how human hands could have accomplished such work under the cover of darkness. The meticulous bending of stalks at their bases, the absence of damage, and the unbroken continuity of the designs suggested intent beyond casual prank or artistic endeavor. Accompanying this proliferation was a growing number of reported sightings of a single UFO hovering above the formations. In rarer instances, multiple craft were glimpsed moving silently in the night sky, sometimes following the outline of fields or hovering near new formations. Witnesses described lights that appeared suddenly, moving in ways that defied conventional explanation. The fleeting nature of these sightings added to the mystery. Observers would glimpse a luminous object or objects above a field, only to see them vanish within moments, leaving behind a perfect pattern pressed into the crops. The combination of earthbound and aerial phenomena suggested to many that the circles were not random, but connected to intelligence capable of orchestrating both land and sky. Media coverage began to reflect the intensity of this period. Local newspapers, radio programs, and television segments highlighted the sudden increase in formations, often accompanied by photographs capturing the intricate geometry. Journalists described fields transformed overnight, their layouts resembling diagrams, star patterns, or mathematical spirals. Farmers' testimonies emphasized the impossibility of human execution under normal circumstances. Large-scale designs, spanning dozens or even hundreds of meters, appeared in the hours between sunset and sunrise. The public was captivated by the visual evidence, and a wider cultural fascination emerged. Observers began to document not only the shapes themselves, but the subtle effects in the surrounding environment. Some noted unusual electromagnetic readings near new formations, or local compasses acting erratically within the immediate vicinity. Others described a faint, persistent hum, like low-frequency resonance emanating from the flattened crops. Even without direct sightings of a UFO or multiple craft, these phenomena added to the impression that the formations were not merely aesthetic, but the product of forces or intelligence operating in ways humans could not fully perceive. The intensity of the 1980s also encouraged collaboration among enthusiasts. Amateur researchers mapped the locations of new formations, noting alignments, distances, and orientation relative to landmarks, roads, and ancient monuments. Comparisons revealed recurring features: circles arranged in geometric sequences, radial spokes emanating from a central point, and occasional spirals echoing patterns seen in earlier decades. Some suggested that the increased frequency reflected intentional communication, a message or pattern unfolding across the landscape, visible to those willing to observe, record, and analyze. Pilgrimages to Wiltshire and surrounding counties became increasingly common. Visitors arrived at first light, cameras in hand, hoping to document new formations before they were disturbed. Some spoke of sensing an unusual presence, or of feeling an intangible connection to the land, amplified by the sudden proliferation of designs. Farmers, researchers, and casual observers alike began to treat the fields as a living archive, each circle a page in a story being written across the countryside, unfolding night by night. The escalation also drew increased scrutiny from skeptics and the scientific community. While pranksters and human hoaxers were often proposed as explanations, the scale, complexity, and rapidity of the formations challenged these claims. Simple human replication seemed unlikely. Large, precise patterns appearing simultaneously in multiple fields, often in remote locations, defied the logistics of nighttime execution. The bending of stalks at the base, rather than breaking, the occasional heating of nodes, and patterns reflecting advanced geometry suggested a sophistication that demanded closer investigation. Observers also noted patterns in timing and geography. The majority of formations appeared during the summer months, when crops were mature but pliable, allowing for clean, intact impressions. Locations often coincided with long-standing agricultural routes, landmarks, and, in some cases, proximity to ancient sites or ley lines, reinforcing the sense that the phenomenon was both intentional and aware of its surroundings. Occasional sightings of a UFO or multiple craft, brief as they were, further encouraged speculation about the involvement of intelligence capable of interacting with both landscape and sky. By the mid-1980s, crop circles had evolved from occasional curiosities into a pervasive and striking phenomenon. The rapid multiplication of formations overnight drew both awe and debate, challenging assumptions about natural events, human capability, and the potential for intelligence beyond our understanding. Enthusiasts, researchers, and casual witnesses alike were compelled to observe, record, and interpret the phenomenon as it unfolded, often traveling great distances to witness the overnight transformation of fields into intricate geometric patterns. The period marked a turning point in the story of crop circles. Where once formations had been sporadic and isolated, now they were frequent, complex, and often accompanied by reports of a UFO or multiple craft. The rapid escalation created a sense of immediacy, urgency, and spectacle. Observers felt as though the countryside itself had become a canvas for messages, a theatre for unseen actors, and a site where the extraordinary had become tangible. By the end of the decade, the 1980s explosion had firmly established the crop circle phenomenon in public consciousness. Fields were no longer merely land, they were stages for geometric artistry, a canvas for unexplained forces, and a bridge between the human imagination and the possibility of intelligence beyond Earth. The sudden multiplication of circles, often overnight, transformed the landscape into a place where mystery, mathematics, and perhaps otherworldly intervention intersected, leaving a lasting impression on all who witnessed the unfolding spectacle. The media arrives, from unexplained mystery to summer spectacle. By the early 1980s, crop circles were no longer a quiet rural curiosity. Their sudden proliferation and increasingly elaborate designs had begun to attract a different kind of attention. The press, local newspapers, national publications, television crews, and radio programs descended upon the English countryside with cameras, microphones, and tape recorders in hand, eager to document the mysterious patterns pressed into fields overnight. The once private experience of discovery, farmers and neighbors noticing a flattened circle at first light, now unfolded under the gaze of an expanding public audience. Crop circles were entering the realm of spectacle. Journalists approached the phenomenon with a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and sensationalism. Headlines proclaimed, "Mysterious rings baffle farmers," or "Fields transformed overnight by unexplained force." And photographs, often grainy yet compelling, illustrated the perfect geometry of the patterns. Simple circles were documented alongside complex, interwoven formations, and the images allowed readers and viewers to witness what words alone could not convey: symmetry, scale, and precision, far exceeding expectations for an ordinary human prank. The visual impact of these photographs played a central role in establishing crop circles as more than fleeting curiosity. They were now a phenomenon to be followed, debated, and interpreted. Television coverage added another layer of immediacy. Film crews often arrived before sunrise to capture the morning light illuminating a new formation. Some segments featured interviews with farmers who had discovered the patterns, offering accounts of the overnight appearance, the absence of footprints or tool marks, and the subtle effects in the surrounding environment. Viewers were introduced not only to the shapes themselves, but also to the sense of wonder, confusion, and even unease experienced by those who first encountered them. Occasionally, a witness described the sight of a single UFO hovering above a newly flattened field, or multiple craft moving silently along the horizon before vanishing. Such reports, whether documented visually or recounted verbally, amplified the sense of mystery for audiences far from the rural landscapes of Wiltshire. The media also contributed to framing the phenomenon as a seasonal event. Crop circles appeared most frequently during the summer months, when crops were fully grown and visible from both the ground and the air. Newspapers and television programs began to predict the likely timing of new formations, noting patterns from previous years. Enthusiasts, reporters, and tourists alike would plan visits to coincide with the peak season, creating a new rhythm. Summer became the time for discovery, documentation, and speculation. Fields transformed overnight into galleries of geometry, attracting attention from far beyond the villages in which they appeared. Photographs and televised reports emphasized scale and intricacy, often showing fields from elevated positions to capture the full expanse of a formation. These images revealed designs far more complex than anyone had expected: interlocking rings, spirals, radial spokes, and, in some instances, patterns reminiscent of mathematical curves. Observers noted that the crops were bent at the base rather than broken, a detail that suggested care and precision. The media, whether consciously or not, helped establish a new expectation. Crop circles were no longer merely oddities. They were masterpieces of geometry, demanding attention and analysis. Letters to newspapers and phone calls to radio shows reflected the public's growing fascination. Farmers reported increased foot traffic across their fields, sometimes frustrated by curious visitors, but also intrigued by the attention. Local businesses saw a rise in tourism, with bed and breakfasts and small shops catering to those eager to witness the phenomenon firsthand. The media coverage created a feedback loop. The more coverage there was, the more people came to see the formations, and the more formations were reported, photographed, and discussed. Summer became synonymous with crop circle season, a period when rural landscapes became stages for mystery and spectacle. Scientific and skeptical commentary also increased with media attention. Agricultural experts and researchers were invited to provide explanations or offer critique. Some proposed that human pranksters had adapted increasingly sophisticated methods to produce larger, more intricate designs overnight. Others suggested natural causes, ranging from wind patterns to soil irregularities. Yet the extraordinary precision, rapid emergence, and occasional association with a single UFO or multiple craft continued to challenge conventional reasoning. The media's attention ensured that these debates were not confined to academic circles, but entered the public consciousness, fueling fascination, discussion, and speculation on an unprecedented scale. For many observers, the media coverage was transformative. What had been a personal or local experience became communal and cultural. People shared photographs, compared notes on designs, and debated meaning in public forums and letters pages. Crop circles evolved into symbols of mystery, intelligence, and the unexplained, their significance amplified by the wide audience now paying attention. The combination of perfect geometry, rapid appearance, and occasional sightings of a UFO or multiple craft gave the phenomenon a dual character, simultaneously artistic and possibly otherworldly. Photographers and television crews also documented subtle effects around new formations. Some reported faint electromagnetic anomalies, shifts in soil composition, or unusual behavior among animals near the patterns. While these details were sometimes overlooked in mainstream reporting, the presence of a single UFO or multiple craft in some accounts reinforced the sense that the phenomenon was more than terrestrial artistry. For the public, the combination of visual spectacle, scientific curiosity, and aerial mystery created a narrative that was both compelling and enduring. The result was a transformation of crop circles into a cultural event. Summer mornings brought anticipation and speculation, with visitors planning routes through Wiltshire and surrounding counties to view the newest formations. News crews captured images from the air, sometimes revealing multiple interconnected circles stretching across several fields. Farmers, local residents, and curious onlookers alike became participants in an unfolding story, their observations and experiences amplified through print, broadcast, and eventually photographic and video documentation. By the mid-1980s, crop circles had transitioned fully from rural curiosity to public spectacle. Media coverage ensured that the phenomenon was no longer confined to the villages in which it appeared. Each new formation, whether simple or complex, became a story, a photograph, and a point of discussion, while the occasional UFO or multiple craft in the sky heightened the sense of intelligence and purpose behind the patterns. The stage was set for the next phase, an era in which crop circles would not only be documented, but analyzed, debated, and mythologized, their presence woven into the culture of both mystery and imagination. In this way, the media transformed crop circles from isolated events into a shared experience, bridging communities, encouraging observation, and amplifying wonder. Fields became stages, cameras and lenses became instruments of exploration, and the combination of earthbound patterns with aerial sightings, whether a single UFO or multiple craft, gave the public a sense of connection to something far larger, more intricate, and more mysterious than they could previously imagine. Crop circles had become a summer spectacle, one that would draw attention, debate, and fascination for years to come. Doug and Dave, two pensioners who confess to fooling the world, By the mid-1980s, crop circles had captured the imagination of the public, the press, and researchers alike. Fields in Wiltshire and beyond were rapidly filling with increasingly complex patterns, and discussions about intelligence, intention, and perhaps extraterrestrial involvement had become commonplace. Then, in 1991, a revelation shook the phenomenon. Two elderly men from England, Douglas Bower and David Chorley, came forward claiming responsibility for many of the formations that had appeared over the previous decade. Their story, presented in interviews, photographs, and televised segments, offered a seemingly straightforward explanation: a human origin. Doug and Dave described their methods in meticulous detail. Working under the cover of darkness, they would select fields weeks in advance, often coordinating routes to minimize detection and maximize effect. They employed simple tools: wooden planks, ropes, and garden rollers. The technique was straightforward in concept but required precise timing, coordination, and knowledge of geometry. They bent stalks carefully, pressing the crops to the ground without breaking them, creating circular patterns that appeared perfect when viewed from above. Their confessions included anecdotes of nights spent moving through moonlit fields, measuring and marking points, and occasionally racing against early dawn or encroaching weather. The announcement of their confessions was met with a mixture of skepticism, curiosity, and in some cases, disappointment. Some members of the public felt vindicated, seeing the mystery explained through mundane human effort rather than intelligence beyond the ordinary. Others doubted the extent of Doug and Dave's claims, pointing out that certain formations, especially those appearing during the late 1980s, were far larger and more complex than what two men could plausibly execute in the time available. While the occasional UFO had been reported near some of the formations credited to them, the question remained whether all sightings and patterns could be explained by human hands alone. The confessions did not diminish public interest. If anything, they added a new layer to the narrative. Doug and Dave became figures of intrigue, demonstrating that human creativity, determination, and coordination could rival expectations of sophistication previously attributed to unknown intelligence. Enthusiasts studied their methods, attempted to replicate designs, and documented the differences between the circles they produced and formations appearing contemporaneously in other regions. Some researchers concluded that while Doug and Dave accounted for many patterns, the sheer variety, scale, and occasional precision of other formations suggested additional influences or contributors. Doug and Dave also emphasized the playful, mischievous aspect of their work. They described their motivation as a combination of curiosity, humor, and the thrill of seeing something impossible appear overnight. They recounted stories of farmers discovering the flattened crops in the morning, neighbors speculating on supernatural or extraterrestrial involvement, and journalists arriving to document the patterns before anyone could suspect a human origin. For them, the activity was a game, a social experiment, and a challenge to the public's perception of what was real, possible, or explainable. While some critics used the confessions to dismiss crop circles entirely, others recognized the complexity of the phenomenon. Doug and Dave's circles were often smaller and less intricate than the elaborate interlocking formations appearing in the late 1980s, and they lacked the occasional subtle anomalies reported in other fields: nodes bent without breakage, magnetic or electromagnetic effects, and fleeting sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft hovering overhead. These distinctions prompted a division in the community. Some formations were clearly human-made, while others remained unexplained, maintaining an aura of mystery that continued to draw attention, research, and speculation. The revelation of human involvement also inspired discussions about the broader cultural implications of the phenomenon. Crop circles had become part of a shared narrative, uniting farmers, researchers, tourists, and journalists in a seasonal spectacle. Doug and Dave's actions highlighted the intersection between human ingenuity and perception, illustrating how carefully executed patterns could inspire wonder, suspicion, and debate. Their confessions reinforced the idea that some of the mystery lay not only in the phenomenon itself, but also in human psychology, the desire to find intelligence, purpose, or meaning where none might exist, or where multiple influences intersected, human and possibly otherwise. Yet despite their admission, certain formations continued to defy simple explanation. Researchers noted that more elaborate designs, sometimes appearing near the Wiltshire Triangle or remote locations, were unlikely to have been produced by two elderly men working with planks and ropes. These formations occasionally coincided with the brief appearance of a single UFO, or in rarer instances, multiple craft. Such reports, combined with geometric sophistication beyond what Doug and Dave had described, ensured that some of the mystery persisted, maintaining public fascination and ongoing investigation. The story of Doug and Dave also inspired a generation of Circlemakers and enthusiasts. Their confessions revealed that, with planning, patience, and an understanding of geometry, humans could create patterns that captured the public imagination, evoked awe, and sometimes led observers to speculate about intelligence beyond the ordinary. Hobbyists, artists, and researchers experimented with new designs, sometimes attempting to replicate the techniques described by the pensioners, and sometimes seeking to surpass them in scale and intricacy. This period marked the beginning of a self-aware, human-driven crop circle culture, layered atop the ongoing narrative of unexplained phenomena. For the public, the confessions were simultaneously enlightening and confounding. They demonstrated that human action could account for many formations, yet left space for wonder. Observers continued to report unusual phenomena around other formations, single UFO sightings, fleeting lights in the night sky, or subtle environmental anomalies. These events suggested that while Doug and Dave explained part of the story, the broader phenomenon might still include influences beyond ordinary human activity. In this way, the narrative became richer, more complex, and even more compelling. In the decades following their confessions, Doug and Dave's contribution has been recognized as a pivotal moment in the history of crop circles. They proved that human ingenuity could rival expectations of precision and scale, while also demonstrating how mystery can be amplified by expectation, media coverage, and cultural imagination. At the same time, their work coexisted with formations that remained unexplained, leaving the door open for speculation about intelligence, energy, and perhaps other forces at work. Thus, the story of Doug and Dave illustrates both the human capacity for creativity and the enduring allure of the unknown. They remind us that while some phenomena can be traced to earthly hands, others persist in the shadows of mystery, inviting observation, analysis, and imagination. The pensioners' confessions became a milestone, a clear example of human influence, yet not a closure of the story, as the phenomenon continued to evolve, captivate, and intrigue all who sought to understand it. But the patterns evolve, beyond what two men could plausibly do. By the early 1990s, the crop circle phenomenon had entered a new stage. While the confessions of Doug and Dave had explained a number of formations from the preceding decade, observers increasingly noticed that new patterns were appearing that surpassed the capabilities of two individuals, even working in coordination and under the cover of darkness. Fields were no longer transformed into simple rings or interlocking circles. The geometry was evolving, becoming more intricate, ambitious, and in some cases, almost impossibly precise. The new patterns often spanned hundreds of meters, incorporating multiple layers of symmetry, spirals, interwoven polygons, and shapes that suggested advanced mathematical understanding. Some designs seemed to follow sequences familiar to those who study fractals, while others reflected proportions found in nature, such as the logarithmic spirals of seashells or the branching of trees. The level of planning, execution, and timing required to produce such formations was far beyond what two elderly men, even motivated and skilled, could achieve under moonlight with simple boards and ropes. Observers documented patterns appearing in rapid succession, sometimes across several fields in a single night. In a few extraordinary cases, multiple formations were reported appearing in proximity to one another, aligned with striking precision. Photographs from elevated positions revealed the staggering scope of these new designs. They were no longer merely objects to be studied from the ground. Their scale demanded aerial perspective, showing complex interconnections that could only be appreciated from above. Alongside the evolving designs, reports of aerial phenomena persisted. Witnesses occasionally described a UFO hovering silently above a newly formed field, observing it from above or moving slowly along the horizon before disappearing. In rarer cases, multiple craft were observed, moving in formation or shifting in ways that seemed deliberate and coordinated. While these sightings were fleeting, they were often reported in conjunction with patterns that could not easily be attributed to human pranksters, reinforcing the sense that intelligence, human or otherwise, was guiding the phenomenon. The changing nature of the patterns also drew increased attention from mathematicians, scientists, and amateur researchers. Detailed measurements revealed astonishing accuracy, angles precise to fractions of a degree, concentric circles perfectly spaced, and complex symmetries that reflected principles of geometry far beyond the experience of casual circlemakers. Some formations included shapes and sequences not previously seen in the historical record of crop circles, suggesting experimentation, evolution, or the influence of knowledge not yet integrated into the techniques of known hoaxers. Observers also noted subtle anomalies within these advanced formations. Stalks were bent rather than broken, sometimes exhibiting spiral or twisted growth near the base, a phenomenon that did not occur in human-made designs. Electromagnetic irregularities were occasionally measured in the soil, and compasses could behave erratically when placed within certain formations. These details, while not universally present, distinguished the evolving patterns from those attributed to Doug and Dave, suggesting an element of the unknown in their creation. The sophistication of these new patterns captured public imagination. Newspapers and magazines showcased aerial photographs, emphasizing scale, intricacy, and mathematical beauty. Tourists, researchers, and enthusiasts flocked to the countryside in increasing numbers, seeking to witness the formations firsthand, document their dimensions, and speculate on their origin. Overnight, fields became stages for works of geometric artistry that defied simple explanation, turning the English countryside into a gallery of mystery. The pattern's evolution was also notable in their interaction with the landscape. Some formations appeared near ancient monuments, ley lines, or previously identified energy hotspots, while others emerged in seemingly random locations. Certain designs were oriented with remarkable precision to cardinal directions, the rising or setting sun, or natural features such as hills and rivers. This careful placement reinforced the perception that the formations were not arbitrary, but intentionally situated, reflecting awareness of both geography and perhaps history embedded within the landscape. Researchers documenting the phenomenon began to explore theories that combined mathematics, environmental factors, and intelligence beyond the human. Some suggested that subtle energies, electromagnetic influences, or resonance effects could guide the placement of the formations, interacting with local conditions to produce complex geometric patterns. Others speculated that the occasional presence of a UFO or multiple craft might indicate surveillance, observation, or coordination from above, though the precise nature of such influence remained unknown. As the decade progressed, the evolving patterns inspired a new generation of circlemakers, attempting to replicate or even surpass the complexity they observed. Artists, mathematicians, and hobbyists experimented with elaborate designs, sometimes incorporating fractals, spirals, and interlocking geometries. While some human-made patterns were impressive, the sheer scale and precision of certain formations, particularly those appearing in remote locations or overnight, continued to defy explanation. The distinction between human creativity and unexplained phenomena became increasingly nuanced, blending technical skill, imagination, and persistent mystery. For many observers, the evolution of crop circles was a reminder that the phenomenon was not static. It was dynamic, responsive, and unfolding over time, suggesting intelligence capable of innovation and adaptation. Simple rings of the past had transformed into complex, interconnected designs that seemed to anticipate observation, analysis, and interpretation. The occasional UFO or multiple craft reported above these formations added another dimension to the mystery, reinforcing the perception that both terrestrial and aerial forces were at play. The growing sophistication also sparked debate among enthusiasts and skeptics alike. Could such advanced designs be produced by unknown human circlemakers, working in coordination with technology or tools yet unseen? Or did the intricacy and rapid emergence of formations suggest influences beyond human capability? The presence of aerial phenomena, the recurring appearance near historical sites, and the subtle anomalies in plant structure and soil reinforced the belief among many researchers that the crop circle phenomenon had evolved into something far larger and more complex than previously imagined. By the mid-1990s, it was clear that the story of crop circles had entered a new chapter. While Doug and Dave had demonstrated that humans could create remarkable designs, the patterns that now appeared exceeded the plausible reach of two pensioners. They were larger, more intricate, and sometimes associated with environmental or aerial phenomena that defied simple explanation. The evolving formations suggested a phenomenon capable of learning, adapting, and creating, and they ensured that public fascination, scientific curiosity, and speculative discussion continued to grow. In this stage of the crop circle phenomenon, the evolution of patterns became a central focus. Each new formation was not merely a shape in a field, but a statement, a display of geometry, and a potential message. Observers, researchers, and enthusiasts documented, measured, and speculated, all aware that they were witnessing a phenomenon in motion, dynamic, sophisticated, and far beyond what two men with planks could plausibly achieve. The occasional UFO or multiple craft hovering nearby only added to the sense of intelligence and intention, a reminder that the mystery of crop circles was alive, evolving, and far from fully understood. Fractals, geometry, and hidden mathematics. Formations too perfect to be random. As the crop circle phenomenon advanced through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, a new dimension of fascination emerged: mathematics. Observers, researchers, and even casual visitors began to notice that many formations were not simply aesthetic or ornamental, but reflected principles of geometry and, in some cases, advanced mathematics. It was no longer enough to marvel at the sheer scale or symmetry of the patterns. The lines, angles, and proportions hinted at knowledge, intention, and a complexity that defied casual human replication. Fractals became one of the earliest mathematical concepts applied to crop circles. For those familiar with natural patterns, the resemblance was unmistakable. Spirals that mimicked the logarithmic curves found in sunflower heads, branching structures that resembled tree growth or river deltas, and repeating motifs that echoed self-similar structures in nature began to appear with increasing frequency. Each formation seemed to encapsulate both simplicity and complexity, as though the designer, human, other, or unknown, understood a language of proportion and recursion that extended beyond ordinary perception. Geometric precision was another defining feature. Circles were not merely round, they were perfectly concentric, sometimes divided by radial spokes or interlocking polygons, each proportionally exact. Angles could be measured to fractions of a degree, and the spacing of elements reflected a consistency that suggested careful calculation. Some designs incorporated elements of sacred geometry, the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequences, and harmonic ratios that have long fascinated mathematicians, artists, and architects. Observers noted that these were not random coincidences. The patterns appeared intentionally crafted to align with specific mathematical principles, suggesting intelligence behind the execution. The occasional UFO was reported near such formations, adding a further layer of intrigue. Witnesses described a single craft hovering silently above a field as a new pattern emerged, lights moving slowly as though observing or guiding the formation. In rarer instances, multiple craft were sighted, moving deliberately along the horizon or tracing the outlines of fields. While these sightings were brief and unpredictable, they reinforced the sense that the geometry observed on the ground might correspond to a higher level of intelligence operating across both Earth and sky. Researchers began systematic studies of crop circle geometry. Measurements were taken of radii, angles, and spacing, often compared across multiple formations over time. Certain motifs appeared repeatedly: nested circles, spirals within spirals, overlapping polygons. Analysts noted symmetries that were mathematically remarkable, often reflecting principles that would require precise calculation and execution. Even when human circlemakers attempted to replicate these designs, observers noted subtle differences, irregularities in proportion, minor errors in symmetry, or inconsistency in the bending of stalks. These deviations highlighted the extraordinary exactness of the original patterns, emphasizing the difficulty of achieving such precision without meticulous planning, or perhaps some other guiding influence. Fractals, in particular, revealed a remarkable evolution in design. Simple, repeating shapes became increasingly complex, showing recursion at multiple scales. A single pattern might contain an internal spiral that echoed the overall design, or radial spokes that subdivided into smaller, repeating structures. Such designs, while achievable conceptually, posed immense practical challenges for execution in the field at night, often spanning hundreds of meters. The presence of subtle anomalies in plant structure, combined with the occasional sighting of a single UFO or multiple craft, suggested a phenomenon that was capable of extraordinary precision while remaining imperceptible during creation. Mathematical analysis extended to proportions and alignment. Many formations were oriented with reference to cardinal directions, solar or lunar positions, or nearby landmarks. Some researchers identified alignments with ancient monuments, hilltops, or rivers, suggesting intentional placement relative to the landscape. Distances between elements were consistent, ratios repeated, and relationships between individual shapes reflected a deeper geometric order. To those studying the phenomenon, the formations were not random art. They were deliberate expressions of structure, harmony, and possibly communication. Observers also noted that the complexity of the designs often increased with each season. Early formations were simple, concentric circles or small interlocking rings. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, patterns had evolved into spirals, nested polygons, and multi-layered structures that seemed almost algorithmic in nature. Some suggested that the progression of design reflected learning or experimentation, either by human circlemakers developing new techniques or by a phenomenon operating beyond ordinary human capability. In either case, the mathematics embedded within the patterns became central to understanding the evolution of crop circles. The public fascination with geometry and mathematics in crop circles grew alongside media coverage. Photographs highlighting perfect symmetry, proportional alignment, and repeating fractal structures were published in newspapers, magazines, and later in television documentaries. Enthusiasts began to map formations, record measurements, and even attempt to decode potential messages hidden within the designs. Discussions of Fibonacci sequences, pi ratios, and geometric harmonics became part of the conversation, linking the visual beauty of the patterns with intellectual curiosity. Despite the clarity of geometric principles, certain formations continued to defy complete explanation. Observers documented subtle effects within the flattened crops, stalks bent in spirals rather than broken, unusual electromagnetic readings, and environmental anomalies that accompanied some of the most mathematically intricate designs. The occasional UFO or multiple craft seen hovering above or near these formations contributed to the sense that the phenomenon was not merely a matter of art or calculation, but might involve an intelligence capable of operating both in the air and on the ground, with an awareness of mathematics, proportion, and aesthetics. Fractals and hidden mathematics also offered a bridge between the tangible and the enigmatic. While some patterns could be analyzed, measured, and replicated conceptually, the combination of scale, execution, and subtle anomalies suggested an intelligence that transcended ordinary human capability. For researchers and enthusiasts alike, the mathematics embedded within the formations became a lens through which to explore the phenomenon. The shapes themselves were evidence, the geometry a language, and the occasional UFO or multiple craft sightings a reminder of the potential presence of an observer beyond ordinary perception. By the mid-1990s, it was clear that crop circles had become a field where mathematics, artistry, and mystery converged. Fractals, geometry, and hidden proportions were no longer incidental. They were central to the phenomenon's identity. The precision, scale, and recurrence of these mathematical features distinguished the most intricate formations from simple human-made designs, including those attributed to Doug and Dave. Observers recognized that while humans could replicate certain elements, the combination of flawless geometry, environmental anomalies, and aerial phenomena suggested a phenomenon that operated on multiple levels simultaneously: visual, mathematical, and potentially otherworldly. In this way, the study of fractals, geometry, and hidden mathematics revealed a new dimension of crop circles. Each formation became not only a visual spectacle, but also a puzzle, a demonstration of proportion and precision, and in some cases, a possible message encoded in shape and space. The occasional UFO or multiple craft seen above these fields reinforced the perception that intelligence was involved, an awareness of both design and observation. As the patterns continued to evolve, the mathematics became inseparable from the mystery, creating a phenomenon that was at once beautiful, perplexing, and compelling. Scientific investigations, microwave nodes, magnetic anomalies, measurable traces. As crop circles grew in both complexity and frequency during the 1980s and 1990s, curiosity shifted from public fascination and artistic admiration to systematic investigation. Researchers, physicists, botanists, and other specialists began visiting formations with equipment in hand, intent on understanding whether the phenomenon could be explained through known physical processes, human intervention, or something less conventional. Observations and measurements were recorded with meticulous attention, often producing findings that both intrigued and confounded the scientific community. One of the earliest and most widely discussed discoveries involved the stalks of the crops themselves. In formations attributed to unknown sources, nodes along the stems, points where leaves emerge, were often bent at right angles without breaking. In many cases, the nodes exhibited elongation, as though heat had caused the plant tissue to expand before the stalk collapsed. Laboratory analysis suggested that the effect resembled the results of microwave radiation, a type of energy capable of penetrating plant tissue and causing rapid internal heating. Experiments attempting to replicate these changes mechanically or chemically on ordinary crops often failed to produce the same precision, leaving researchers puzzled. Magnetic anomalies were another area of focus. Instruments placed within and around formations sometimes recorded localized fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. Compasses could behave erratically, needle deflection was observed, and electromagnetic readings occasionally displayed brief but unusual spikes. These anomalies were subtle, not consistently reproducible, yet sufficiently striking to prompt further investigation. The patterns of these magnetic effects occasionally correlated with particular geometric features of the formations, hinting at a relationship between the shape of the circle and the energy measured within it. Temperature variations within flattened crops also drew attention. Infrared measurements revealed that certain areas of a formation could be warmer or cooler than surrounding fields, sometimes immediately after discovery. The gradients were small, often only a few degrees, but consistent enough to warrant repeated observation. In some cases, the affected areas appeared to radiate energy in ways that suggested a sudden and concentrated application. Yet there were no footprints, machinery, or other signs that human intervention had introduced heat artificially. These measurable traces added weight to the hypothesis that the formation process involved some form of energy transfer not yet fully understood. Researchers also examined soil composition. Studies revealed subtle compaction differences in areas of flattened crops, sometimes accompanied by slight chemical changes. Certain trace elements appeared in unusual concentrations, and soil porosity could differ slightly from adjacent untouched fields. Although subtle, these effects were repeatedly noted in formations deemed too intricate or large to have been produced by two individuals with boards and ropes. When considered alongside microwaved nodes, magnetic anomalies, and thermal irregularities, the evidence suggested that the creation of some formations involved processes outside conventional human methods. Seeds collected from within formations occasionally displayed unusual characteristics. Germination rates differed slightly from control samples, and early-stage seedlings sometimes exhibit twisted growth patterns or abnormal nodal spacing. While these effects were not universally present, their recurrence in multiple formations indicated that the phenomenon could affect living tissue in subtle, measurable ways. Botanists documented these anomalies meticulously, often returning to the same fields across seasons to compare growth and recovery. The occasional UFO or sightings of multiple craft hovering over or near new formations were reported in conjunction with these measurable effects. Observers described lights moving in deliberate patterns, sometimes lingering long enough for photographs or sketches. While such aerial phenomena were brief and unpredictable, their association with fields exhibiting microwave nodes, magnetic anomalies, or unusual soil characteristics added a layer of intrigue to scientific inquiry. Researchers often approached these reports cautiously, aware of the difficulty of corroborating eyewitness accounts but unable to dismiss their potential significance entirely. Advanced imaging techniques revealed further complexity. Aerial photography, infrared scanning, and even early satellite imagery allowed scientists to view formations from above, revealing features invisible from the ground. Patterns extended beyond the obvious circles and spirals, incorporating subtle alignments, microstructures, and fractional symmetries. In some cases, designs appeared to follow mathematical principles too precise to be random, and measurements suggested that the effects on the crops and soil were synchronized with these geometric patterns. Attempts to reproduce these phenomena in controlled environments often fell short. Scientists tried mechanical flattening, chemical treatments, and heat application, but the combination of microwave nodes, precise geometry, subtle magnetic shifts, and consistent scale could rarely be replicated simultaneously. This failure did not provide proof of extraterrestrial involvement, yet it reinforced the impression that certain formations exhibited characteristics that were extraordinary, if not entirely understood. Field researchers often worked in teams, arriving before dawn to document new formations. Measurements included node angles, stalk length, compaction patterns, electromagnetic readings, and thermal scans. Notes were meticulously kept, photographs taken from multiple angles, and sometimes instruments left behind for extended monitoring. These investigations, repeated across different locations and seasons, established a pattern of anomalies that could not easily be attributed solely to human activity. Collaborations with physicists and engineers introduced further layers of analysis. Some hypothesized that plasma vortices, ionized air currents, or other natural but uncommon energy phenomena might account for some of the observed effects. Others suggested that the occasional UFO or multiple craft might be related to these anomalies, either as observers or as active participants. While definitive conclusions remained elusive, the combination of empirical measurements and aerial observations established crop circles as a legitimate object of scientific curiosity rather than mere folklore or prank. By the mid-1990s, scientific investigations had established several consistent observations. Nodes sometimes exhibited heat-related elongation. Magnetic and electromagnetic anomalies occurred in and around formations. Thermal gradients were measurable. Soil chemistry and compaction could differ subtly from surrounding fields, and seeds occasionally showed abnormal growth patterns. When considered alongside aerial phenomena, whether a single UFO or multiple craft, these measurable traces formed a constellation of evidence that suggested some formations involved processes beyond ordinary human activity. These studies did not settle the debate over origin, but they shifted the discussion. Crop circles could no longer be dismissed outright as simple hoaxes or whimsical art. There were observable, repeatable effects, measurable anomalies, and associations with aerial phenomena that demanded attention, analysis, and documentation. The phenomenon had grown to encompass visual spectacle, geometric sophistication, environmental impact, and, occasionally, mysterious aerial activity. A multi-layered puzzle challenging both conventional reasoning and imaginative interpretation. In this way, scientific investigation transformed crop circles from local curiosities into subjects of rigorous inquiry. Each formation became a laboratory, a test case, and a question. What combination of forces, energy, or intelligence could produce such precision, effect, and subtle influence on living systems? The occasional UFO or multiple craft remained part of the broader narrative, reinforcing the impression that some aspect of the phenomenon was not fully terrestrial, not fully understood, and continually deserving of study. The battle of belief, hoaxers versus researchers, ridicule versus mystery. As crop circles multiplied and evolved through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, the phenomenon became a battleground of belief, skepticism, and scientific inquiry. On one side were the researchers, dedicated to meticulous documentation, measurement, and analysis. On the other were hoaxers, pranksters, and skeptics, eager to demonstrate that the formations could be explained through ordinary human effort. The tension between these perspectives created a complex landscape in which truth, interpretation, and imagination collided. The story of Doug and Dave had initially fueled the skeptical argument. Their confessions showed that human ingenuity, patience, and coordination could produce striking designs, and many observers were eager to apply this logic universally. Newspapers, television programs, and casual onlookers emphasized the hoaxing potential, presenting crop circles as the product of clever mischief rather than mystery. Yet, as formations became increasingly intricate, larger, and more mathematically sophisticated, these explanations began to falter. Not all formations could be traced to known Circlemakers, and many exhibited anomalies in plant structure, soil chemistry, and environmental conditions that defied simple explanation. Researchers dedicated themselves to documenting these unexplained elements. Botanists measured nodal elongation and stalk bending, physicists recorded magnetic irregularities, and mathematicians analyzed geometric precision and fractal patterns. These studies were often conducted in collaboration, as a single formation could contain dozens of variables requiring cross-disciplinary expertise. Observers sometimes reported the presence of a single UFO hovering silently above a field, or, in rarer instances, multiple craft appearing in the vicinity. Such observations, while fleeting and difficult to verify, complicated attempts to dismiss all formations as human-made. The debate extended to the public sphere. Media coverage often amplified dramatic narratives, emphasizing hoaxes and confessions, while also highlighting unexplained phenomena. Popular culture reflected this tension. Television documentaries alternated between showcasing precise human-made designs and exploring the possibility of intelligence beyond human comprehension. Letters to editors, forum discussions, and early internet message boards became forums for debate, with enthusiasts, skeptics, and casual observers arguing about the origin, purpose, and significance of the patterns. The hoaxes themselves contributed to the complexity of belief. Some were amateurs inspired by Doug and Dave, creating patterns for amusement, artistic expression, or challenge. Others were more sophisticated, attempting to replicate the style and precision of formations thought to be unexplained. These human-made patterns, particularly when appearing in rapid succession or at scale, made it increasingly difficult for observers to distinguish between the explainable and the mysterious. At the same time, human activity introduced evidence of ingenuity, experimentation, and creativity that intersected with the phenomena, creating a layered narrative of intention, skill, and possible influence from beyond. Researchers often found themselves in the position of defending both the legitimacy of unexplained patterns and the need for objective documentation. Skeptics argued that anomalies could be produced by mundane factors, wind, water, or mechanical flattening. Yet repeated measurement, careful observation, and statistical analysis suggested that certain formations could not be fully explained through these processes. Microwave nodes, subtle magnetic anomalies, and geometrically perfect structures appeared too frequently and too consistently to be dismissed outright. The occasional sighting of a single UFO or multiple craft near a formation added another dimension, raising questions about observation, intelligence, and the possible interaction between aerial phenomena and ground patterns. The battle of belief was not limited to science versus hoaxes. It also extended to human psychology and cultural perception. Observers naturally sought patterns, significance, and meaning, often projecting intentions onto the formations they encountered. Researchers noted that expectation, prior knowledge, and cultural context influenced interpretation, complicating objective analysis. Skeptics highlighted these biases as evidence that belief in mystery was itself a human construct, shaped by storytelling, media coverage, and social reinforcement. Meanwhile, enthusiasts argued that repeated observations of unexplained effects, including plant anomalies and aerial phenomena, demanded a consideration of possibilities beyond conventional explanation. Legal and logistical issues further complicated the landscape. Farmers, landowners, and local authorities sometimes faced disputes over access, liability, and documentation. Researchers required permission to enter fields, install monitoring equipment, and collect samples, while hoaxers sought anonymity to avoid prosecution. These constraints shaped the timing and location of observations, occasionally limiting opportunities for direct verification and adding to the sense of uncertainty and suspense surrounding the phenomenon. Academic publications, while limited, attempted to establish credibility through peer-reviewed studies. Papers examining nodal elongation, fractal geometry, and soil anomalies were circulated in scientific journals and conference proceedings. While some academics dismissed the phenomenon as a curiosity or social experiment, others argued for serious investigation, citing reproducible measurements, statistical consistency, and the occasional report of a single UFO or multiple craft as worthy of attention. The dialogue between skepticism and open-minded inquiry became a defining feature of the era, establishing crop circles as a phenomenon at the intersection of science, culture, and mystery. Public engagement continued to escalate. Tourists arrived in the English countryside, sometimes documenting formations before sunrise, measuring distances, and photographing patterns. Media attention turned seasonal, with expectations that each summer might bring new revelations. Skeptics watched for traces of human intervention, while enthusiasts marveled at the intricacy and scale of new designs. Researchers attempted to maintain neutrality, focusing on quantifiable effects while acknowledging the role of belief, perception, and imagination. Despite ongoing debate, certain facts emerged clearly. Patterns continued to appear that exceeded the capabilities of known human circlemakers, incorporating precise geometry, fractal repetition, and subtle anomalies in plant and soil. In some cases, aerial phenomena were reported, either as a single UFO observing a field, or, rarely, multiple craft moving in coordination. These occurrences maintained a persistent aura of mystery, ensuring that the battle of belief was not resolved, but perpetually evolving. By the late 1990s, crop circles had become a symbol of the tension between skepticism and wonder. They illustrated the limits of human understanding, the allure of intelligence beyond ordinary experience, and the challenge of reconciling observable evidence with cultural narratives. Hoaxers demonstrated human skill and creativity. Researchers documented measurable anomalies, and occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft reminded observers that some aspects of the phenomenon remained unexplained. The result was a dynamic interplay of belief, evidence, and imagination, a landscape where certainty was rare and fascination remained constant. In this environment, the battle of belief persisted not as a confrontation to be won, but as an ongoing dialogue. Each new formation, whether explained or mysterious, became part of the conversation. The interplay between hoaxers, researchers, skeptics, and enthusiasts created a rich cultural and scientific ecosystem, in which observation, analysis, and speculation coexisted. And through it all, the crop circles continued to appear, inviting interpretation, study, and wonder, challenging all who encountered them to consider the possibility that some mysteries remain just beyond the reach of full understanding. Crop circles go global. Japan, the United States, South America, beyond. By the mid-1990s, the crop circle phenomenon was no longer confined to the rolling fields of southern England. Patterns began appearing in regions as far-flung as Japan, the United States, South America, and parts of continental Europe. Each new location brought its own cultural context, environmental conditions, and local interpretations. Yet the formations consistently reflected the evolving sophistication seen in England: complex geometry, fractal repetition, and occasionally subtle anomalies in plant and soil. In Japan, reports emerged from rural districts known for rice paddies and carefully cultivated fields. The designs were often circular, sometimes incorporating multiple nested rings or spiral patterns, reflecting a mathematical precision that reminded researchers of the formations in Wiltshire. The juxtaposition of modern farming techniques with ancient tradition added a unique character to Japanese crop circles. Observers noted that while rice stalks differed structurally from wheat, similar nodal bending and stalk elongation could be observed. Occasionally, a single UFO was reported hovering silently above a field, lights reflecting off its surface, or unidentified craft moving along the horizon. These sightings were fleeting, but they mirrored accounts from England, suggesting that the phenomenon, if influenced by aerial observation, could manifest across diverse geographies. Across the United States, crop circles appeared in wheat, corn, and barley fields, particularly in states such as Kansas, Montana, and Oregon. The sheer scale of American farmland allowed for enormous formations, sometimes spanning several hundred meters. Local researchers began applying the same measurement techniques as their English counterparts, documenting node elongation, soil anomalies, and the precise geometry of the patterns. Certain formations were aligned with solar or lunar events, cardinal directions, or natural landmarks, reflecting an awareness of environmental features reminiscent of European designs. Eyewitnesses occasionally described a single UFO approaching a newly formed circle, hovering low for minutes before departing, and in rarer cases, multiple craft moving in coordinated arcs across the sky, lending a sense of intentional observation to the phenomena. South America, particularly Argentina and Brazil, offered yet another perspective. In regions where traditional agriculture coexisted with vast expanses of untamed land, formations appeared overnight with remarkable regularity. Some designs mirrored the spirals and fractal geometries first observed in England, while others introduced unique local motifs influenced by indigenous symbolism and regional landscapes. Researchers measured magnetic anomalies, plant distortions, and subtle electromagnetic readings, confirming that the unusual characteristics previously documented in Europe were present on other continents. Here too, occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft were reported, moving silently over fields or hovering near formations long enough for observers to record sketches, photographs, or notes. One of the striking aspects of this global expansion was the consistency of patterns. Despite differences in crops, climate, and local culture, the formations maintained a recognizable sophistication. Concentric rings, interlocking polygons, spirals within spirals, and other complex geometries. This consistency led some researchers to hypothesize that the phenomenon followed universal principles of design or energy, independent of geography or cultural context. The possibility of intelligence, human or otherwise, operating across disparate locations became an unavoidable consideration, particularly in cases where no trace of human intervention could be found, and the occasional UFO or multiple craft were observed nearby. Europe outside of England also saw a rise in formations. In France, Germany, and the Netherlands, fields of wheat and barley became canvases for intricate circles, some echoing mathematical principles familiar to researchers studying Wiltshire formations. Observers reported similar anomalies in stalks, soil, and electromagnetic readings, suggesting that the physical characteristics of these patterns were consistent across regions. Occasional sightings of a single UFO hovering silently, or multiple craft moving in formation, mirrored reports from Japan, the United States, and South America, reinforcing the sense of a global phenomenon that shared common features while adapting to local environments. The global spread also invited new perspectives from researchers, farmers, and cultural observers. In Japan, patterns were interpreted in light of Shinto beliefs and local spirituality, with circles sometimes associated with sacred mountains or shrines. In the United States, local media emphasized the mystery and spectacle, blending science reporting with folkloric narratives. South American formations occasionally inspired interpretations linked to indigenous mythology and celestial symbolism. Across all locations, the mathematical precision and physical anomalies remained central to scientific study, ensuring that fascination was grounded in measurable phenomena as well as cultural context. The occasional UFO or multiple craft reported in association with these formations added an additional layer of intrigue. In some cases, these aerial phenomena were observed moving in ways that suggested deliberate observation of a field as a pattern emerged. Lights hovered silently, shifted position, or moved along the boundaries of a formation, appearing to survey, measure, or monitor the designs. While these sightings were brief and difficult to confirm, the recurrence of reports across continents suggested that the presence of aerial observation was a notable component of the phenomenon, reinforcing the impression of intelligence behind the creation or monitoring of the formations. The global expansion of crop circles also changed public perception. No longer were they seen as a purely local curiosity or prank. They became an international phenomenon, inspiring conferences, research publications, and collaboration among enthusiasts and scientists worldwide. Maps were compiled, patterns catalogued, and comparisons drawn between continents, highlighting both similarities and unique variations. The meticulous documentation of geometry, fractal design, and subtle anomalies, coupled with occasional aerial observation, elevated the study of crop circles from folklore to a field of serious inquiry. Despite this growing body of research, the question of origin remained unresolved. human ingenuity could explain some formations, particularly those small or achievable with boards and ropes. But the large-scale, precise, and complex designs appeared across continents without clear evidence of human involvement. The consistency of geometry, the subtle environmental effects, and the occasional UFO or multiple craft sightings suggested that the phenomenon, wherever it appeared, operated with remarkable sophistication and precision. Observers and researchers alike were forced to acknowledge that a global mystery was unfolding, one that could not be contained within a single country, culture, or explanation. By the early 2000s, crop circles were recognized as a worldwide phenomenon. Each new formation, whether in Japan, the United States, South America, or continental Europe, reflected the growing complexity, precision, and mystery that had begun in the English countryside decades earlier. Researchers continued to measure, document, and theorize, while witnesses occasionally reported a single UFO or multiple craft observing the patterns. The global reach of crop circles reinforced both the universality and the enigma of the phenomenon, demonstrating that it had transcended local culture and geography to become a mystery with truly international dimensions. Sacred land, circles appearing near megaliths, ley lines, ancient routes. As the phenomenon of crop circles expanded across England and then globally, a curious pattern began to emerge. Many formations appeared in proximity to sites considered sacred, ancient, or otherwise imbued with historical significance. Fields near megalithic monuments, prehistoric stone circles, burial mounds, and long-abandoned ceremonial pathways seemed to attract patterns at rates far higher than chance might allow. Scholars, researchers, and local historians noted that the association between these sacred landscapes and crop circles extended beyond simple geography. There appeared to be a deliberate alignment, a careful positioning that mirrored the contours of ancient routes or the axes of monumental architecture. In Wiltshire, a region already central to crop circle activity, formations frequently appeared near Avebury, a stone circle older than Stonehenge itself. The massive standing stones, remnants of Neolithic construction, arose from the earth in circular patterns that echoed the very designs emerging in the surrounding fields. Observers speculated that the geometric relationships between the stones and the crop circles were not coincidental. Measurements often revealed that the orientation of new formations corresponded to lines connecting ancient monuments or natural landmarks. These alignments suggested that the phenomenon might engage with the landscape's latent geometry, its inherited energy, or at least its long-standing human significance. Silbury Hill, the enormous prehistoric mound nearby, was another frequent point of reference. Standing over 30 meters tall and constructed with remarkable precision, the hill had long puzzled archaeologists. When crop circles appeared in fields radiating outward from its base, observers noted subtle symmetries and alignments that mirrored the hill's circular contours. While the formation itself was composed of flattened crops, its design seemed to respect the underlying topography, weaving across the terrain in ways that acknowledged human construction from thousands of years prior. Occasionally, witnesses reported seeing a single UFO hovering over a newly formed circle near Silbury Hill, or, more rarely, multiple craft moving across the horizon in apparent observation, as though monitoring the interaction between pattern and sacred site. The concept of ley lines, hypothetical alignments connecting ancient sites across the landscape, further complicated the discussion. Though controversial and sometimes dismissed by mainstream archaeology, the idea that sacred energy could flow along invisible lines gained traction among those studying crop circles. Many formations were documented along these presumed lines, creating long corridors of patterns stretching for kilometers. The precision of the geometry, combined with the recurrence along lines of historical or spiritual significance, suggested intentionality. It implied either human knowledge of the alignment or a phenomenon capable of responding to environmental and cultural cues beyond immediate perception. In Scotland and Ireland, crop circles occasionally appeared near megaliths and burial cairns, sites often associated with ritual and celestial observation. Field researchers recorded the spatial relationships meticulously, noting how circles frequently respected sightlines between stones, horizon markers, or rising and setting points of the sun and moon during solstices and equinoxes. These alignments reinforced the impression that the phenomenon might be more than random occurrences in agricultural landscapes. They might reflect a subtle interaction with inherited human perception of space, time, and sacred geography. South America presented parallel occurrences. In Argentina and Brazil, formations emerged near ancient earthworks, geoglyphs, and ceremonial platforms constructed by pre-Columbian civilizations. While the local terrain and crop types differed from European fields, the relationships between circles and ancient sites were strikingly similar. Researchers documented concentric rings, spirals, and geometric designs oriented along paths connecting old ceremonial spaces, often accompanied by the same subtle anomalies noted elsewhere: plant nodal elongation, soil compaction variations, and occasional traces of thermal or electromagnetic irregularities. The occasional UFO observed above these sites, or multiple craft moving in coordination, mirrored accounts from Europe, suggesting that the phenomenon might respect sacred or historically significant landscapes wherever it appeared. The spiritual dimension of these sacred alignments drew interest from meditation groups, practitioners of earth-based rituals, and those who studied geomancy or ancient cosmology. Some visitors reported sensations of energy, subtle vibrations underfoot, or altered perception within or near formations, particularly when they were aligned with ancient sites. While such experiences were subjective and difficult to measure, their consistency across continents and cultures added a layer of experiential data that complemented the physical measurements conducted by researchers. A single UFO or multiple craft, occasionally observed during these experiences, seemed to reinforce the idea that the phenomenon was attentive to these places of human significance. Anthropologists and folklorists noted that sacred sites had long attracted storytelling, ritual, and awe. Crop circles, in appearing at these locations, seemed to continue a tradition of human fascination with the extraordinary. Yet unlike the human constructions themselves, which were deliberate and labor-intensive, the patterns in crops appeared overnight, often with mathematical sophistication and environmental anomalies that human hands could not fully replicate. The effect was to draw attention not only to the landscape, but to the subtle interaction between human history, geography, and phenomena that defied simple explanation. In England, crop circles near ancient roads, Roman earthworks, and medieval parish boundaries further reinforced the connection to sacred land. Researchers mapped these occurrences against historical maps, finding correlations between older pathways and new formations that were statistically unlikely to result from random placement. The proximity to sacred and historically significant sites suggested either knowledge of these locations by human circlemakers, or a phenomenon that by its very nature respected and responded to cultural and historical context. The integration of aerial observation, whether by a single UFO or multiple craft, became part of the narrative of sacred land. Witnesses occasionally described lights moving deliberately along paths defined by the landscape, lingering over formations near megaliths, or ascending quietly into the sky after the creation of new circles. While these reports could not always be verified, the consistency of sightings across regions and continents encouraged serious consideration that the phenomenon, whatever its origin, interacted with human perception, history, and possibly energy embedded in the land itself. By the early 2000s, the alignment of crop circles with sacred land had become a recognized pattern within the study of the phenomenon. Fields near megaliths, burial mounds, ceremonial pathways, and ley lines consistently exhibited formations of remarkable precision, geometry, and subtle environmental anomalies. Occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft at these sites reinforced the sense that the phenomenon was not indifferent to human history or the landscapes we have deemed sacred. It seemed, in some mysterious way, to honor these locations, weaving patterns that acknowledged the past while creating new layers of fascination for the present. Sacred land, with its layered history, energy, and human significance, became a central theme in understanding crop circles. The phenomenon's appearance near megaliths, ley lines, and ancient routes suggested a dialogue, silent, subtle, and deeply compelling, between the earth, human history, and whatever force or intelligence produced these formations. Researchers, enthusiasts, and observers alike came to recognize that these sites were not merely convenient locations for a visual spectacle, but part of a broader tapestry of meaning, geometry, and mystery that spanned continents and millennia. Sound, frequency, and cymatics. The idea of geometry created by vibration. Among the many avenues explored to understand crop circles, one of the most intriguing emerged from the study of sound, frequency, and vibration. Researchers and enthusiasts alike began to investigate the possibility that the patterns appearing in fields could be linked not only to geometry and human perception, but to the physical effects of vibration itself. The science of cymatics, the study of visible patterns created by sound waves interacting with a medium such as sand, water, or a membrane, provided a framework for exploring how energy might shape matter in ways that mirrored the precise designs of crop circles. The basic principles of cymatics are deceptively simple. When a surface is vibrated at a particular frequency, particles on that surface arrange themselves into intricate, repeating patterns. Low frequencies may produce broad, circular forms, while higher frequencies generate complex fractals, interlocking spirals, and geometric arrangements with mathematical precision. Observers noted that the kinds of designs replicated in laboratory cymatic experiments often bore a striking resemblance to crop circle formations. Perfect rings, nested polygons, spirals within spirals, and symmetries that seemed too precise to result from random human effort. This line of inquiry gained traction as researchers examined plant responses to vibration. Experimental studies demonstrated that certain frequencies could induce subtle bending in plant stalks, affect cellular structure, and even influence growth patterns over time. Nodal elongation, a phenomenon previously documented in unexplained formations, was hypothesized to be influenced not only by mechanical flattening, but by exposure to energy fields or vibrations that interacted directly with plant tissue. Soil, too, could respond to vibrational energy, with subtle compaction changes, electromagnetic shifts, or moisture redistribution detectable in some cases. Field researchers began conducting controlled experiments to simulate these effects. Speakers emitting low-frequency tones, high-frequency pulses, and modulated waveforms were positioned above small plots, and the resulting plant responses were meticulously documented. Observers noted the emergence of small circular depressions, arcs, and sometimes more complex arrangements in plant matter. While human-generated vibration could not yet account for large-scale crop circle formations, these experiments offered a tangible demonstration of the plausibility that vibration might play a role in the creation of intricate geometric patterns. The theory extended to aerial phenomena. Witnesses occasionally reported a single UFO or multiple craft moving silently over fields, sometimes coinciding with the appearance of new patterns. Some researchers speculated that these craft, if responsible for pattern creation, might employ energy emissions, vibrations at frequencies beyond ordinary perception, that interacted with plants and soil. The precise, often fractal nature of formations, combined with subtle anomalies in stalks and electromagnetic readings, suggested that some form of energy, possibly vibrational, could influence the physical world without leaving obvious mechanical traces. Historical records offered intriguing parallels. In folklore and ancient texts, references to tones of the earth, songs of the stones, or vibrations of the sky appear repeatedly, often in the context of ritual or spiritual practice. While these accounts were metaphorical, they hinted at a long-standing human recognition that sound, energy, and vibration had profound effects on the environment. Crop circles, in appearing with mathematical precision, and sometimes coinciding with historical or sacred sites, seem to echo this idea that the world itself could respond to vibrational influence in structured and meaningful ways. The global occurrence of crop circles provided additional support for the vibrational hypothesis. Formations appeared in widely differing crops: wheat, barley, rice, corn, across continents and climates. Despite these differences, similar geometries and anomalies persisted. This consistency suggested that the underlying mechanism, if vibrational, operated independently of crop type or local environment. The occasional UFO or multiple craft, observed in conjunction with the patterns, could be seen as potential agents generating or guiding such energy, reinforcing the idea that the phenomenon might involve forces or intelligence beyond immediate human capability. Enthusiasts began to experiment with cymatic methods themselves. Sand, water, and granular media were vibrated at frequencies approximating those hypothesized to influence plants, producing miniature models of crop circle patterns. Spirals, nested polygons, and repeating fractals emerged under controlled conditions, sometimes astonishingly similar to designs observed in actual fields. These exercises reinforced the notion that energy, sound, and vibration could organize matter in ways that are mathematically precise, aesthetically compelling, and potentially capable of influencing living plants if sufficiently powerful or properly directed. Skeptics, while often critical of vibrational explanations, could not entirely dismiss the parallels between cymatic experiments and crop circle formations. Laboratory patterns shared key features with real-world circles: symmetry, fractal repetition, and proportional scaling. While the scale and complexity of actual formations exceeded those achieved in controlled experiments, the foundational principles offered a scientifically plausible avenue for exploration. The theory of vibration did not demand belief in extraterrestrial intervention, yet it could accommodate reports of occasional UFO or multiple craft sightings as potential sources of energy or observation. Cultural interpretations also intersected with the vibrational theory. Some spiritual practitioners suggested that the geometry of crop circles might reflect resonances with the Earth's natural frequencies, or that the phenomenon represented a language of energy encoded in form. Whether metaphorical or literal, this perspective emphasized the relationship between vibration, matter, and consciousness, proposing that the patterns might not merely be visual art, but expressions of energy interacting with life itself. Visitors reported subtle sensations in fields: tingling, pressure, or warmth, experiences that paralleled laboratory observations of vibrational influence on plant matter and soil. By the early 2000s, the study of sound, frequency, and cymatics had become a respected component of crop circle research. While it did not provide definitive answers regarding origin, the approach offered a coherent framework for understanding the precision and complexity of formations, the environmental anomalies documented in plants and soil, and the occasional aerial observations associated with them. The theory suggested that energy, vibration, and resonance could shape matter into patterns of remarkable symmetry and beauty, whether guided by human intention, natural processes, or intelligence beyond immediate perception. In conclusion, the investigation of crop circles through the lens of vibration and cymatics opened new dimensions of inquiry. It bridged science, art, and spirituality, linking measurable physical effects with geometry, pattern, and historical context. Occasional UFO sightings or multiple craft reports provided a complementary layer, hinting that these formations, whether produced by energy alone or guided observation, interacted with the world in ways both subtle and profound. Crop circles, when viewed through vibration, revealed themselves as more than visual phenomena. They became the tangible manifestation of invisible forces, resonating through fields, across continents, and into the imagination of all who observed them. The spiritual pilgrims, meditation groups, silent dawn gatherings in the fields. As the phenomenon of crop circles continued to evolve, it began attracting a very different kind of attention, not from scientists seeking measurements or from media outlets hungry for spectacle, but from those drawn by the quiet, contemplative resonance of the patterns themselves. Meditation groups, spiritual seekers, and individuals curious about the intersection of earth, energy, and human consciousness started journeying to the fields where circles appeared. Their intent was not to dissect or debunk, but to witness, to sit within the geometry, and to experience the subtle, almost ineffable sense of presence that many reported upon entering a formation. These gatherings were often conducted at dawn. The first light of morning, soft and diffused, illuminated the flattened stalks and the sweeping curves of the circles. Silence was a central practice. Participants moved slowly, deliberately, observing the patterns without intrusion, without altering the crops, without speaking. Some would sit in the center of a formation, feeling the damp earth beneath them, noting how the air seemed to carry a subtle vibration, a quiet hum that could not be detected by instruments, yet seemed to resonate within the body. Others would follow the outer edges, tracing the curves with their eyes, letting the symmetry guide the rhythm of their breathing. Many reported a sense of connection, not only to the circle itself, but to the land, to history, and to something larger than themselves. The circles, often appearing near megaliths or along ancient routes, seemed to amplify the perception of sacredness inherent in the landscape. A single UFO was occasionally observed by early risers, hovering quietly at a distance, or a few witnesses described multiple craft moving slowly along the horizon, as though aware of the human presence below. These sightings were rare, brief, and silent, yet their recurrence added a layer of mystery that deepened the sense of wonder and reverence among those present. For many spiritual pilgrims, the circles became places of meditation, contemplation, and personal reflection. Some practiced silent walking, following the geometry as a kind of moving mantra, feeling the curves and angles as a guide for the rhythm of thought and breath. Others sat in stillness, eyes closed, allowing the energy of the formation, subtle as it might be, to interact with their awareness. Journals were kept, notes made of feelings, impressions, and the peculiar interplay of light, air, and texture that seemed to distinguish these fields from ordinary farmland. The phenomenon attracted groups with diverse backgrounds. Practitioners of yoga, tai chi, and other energy-focused disciplines reported heightened awareness within the circles. Artists, musicians, and writers found inspiration in the forms, often attempting to replicate the geometry in their work, or to capture the sense of presence they experienced in photographs, sketches, or compositions. Researchers sympathetic to these experiences began to note correlations between subjective reports and measurable aspects of the fields, subtle shifts in soil moisture, slight electromagnetic anomalies, and nodal elongation in plants that aligned with observations in more scientific studies. The pilgrimages were often coordinated around the times of year when formations were most likely to appear, particularly late spring and summer in England, or during analogous growing seasons in other countries. News of new circles spread quietly among communities of spiritual seekers, and word-of-mouth communication became a kind of gentle network, guiding visitors to fields in rural England, Japan, the United States, and South America. In some instances, early risers arrived to discover that they were not alone, joining others in silent observation, sitting at the edge of the circles, sharing the space with strangers who became companions in the act of witnessing the extraordinary. Some participants described subtle effects on perception, time seeming to slow, sounds from distant animals, or wind taking on heightened clarity, a faint sense of motion or vibration beneath the feet that could not be measured but was felt profoundly. Occasional UFO sightings, or the observation of multiple craft overhead, reinforced the sense that the circles were not simply passive objects but nodes of interaction, locations where land, geometry, and perhaps intelligence intersected. These aerial sightings were never intrusive. They appeared briefly, often at the edge of vision, and then departed quietly, leaving the formation itself undisturbed. The practice of meditation in crop circles also evolved into communal rituals. Some groups held morning sessions where silence was punctuated by gentle breathing exercises or the soft ringing of a bell, designed to attune participants to the subtle energy they sensed within the formation. Others performed movement meditations, walking along the edges of the circle in sync with geometric features, tracing spirals, radii, and concentric rings, as if enacting a ritual choreography encoded in the landscape itself. Pilgrims reported feelings of awe, grounding, and connection, a sense of being aligned with something larger, invisible yet palpably present, a rhythm that existed beyond ordinary perception. Internationally, these practices mirrored one another, suggesting a universal human response to the geometry, precision, and mystery of crop circles. In Japan, meditation groups gathered at dawn in rice paddies shaped by intricate patterns, moving in silence along spirals or concentric arcs. In the United States, practitioners often visited fields in wheat or corn, sitting in circles with hands placed on the earth, noting the subtle sway of stalks in the morning breeze and the way light shifted across the patterns. South American observers reported similar experiences near ceremonial or sacred sites where crop formations appeared. Across continents, the phenomenon elicited reflection, stillness, and reverence. Interestingly, the meditative experience sometimes coincided with physical observations of the phenomenon. Witnesses occasionally noted unusual effects in the atmosphere, sudden shifts in temperature, a faint haze of light, or the presence of a single UFO hovering in the distance. In rarer instances, multiple craft were observed moving along the horizon, appearing to track or mirror the geometry of the formations below. These sightings were fleeting and subtle, and never disrupted the tranquility of the gatherings, yet they contributed to a deepening sense that the circles were more than mere patterns in crops. They were sites of engagement, observation, and resonance with forces beyond ordinary human perception. The spiritual pilgrimages also fostered a sense of community. Visitors from different countries shared experiences, recordings, sketches, and reflections. Networks formed, informal at first, later more organized, allowing those drawn to these formations to connect across borders and disciplines. Some researchers began documenting the subjective experiences alongside measurable anomalies, seeking correlations between perception, physical effect, and reported aerial activity. The interplay of geometry, vibration, history, and human consciousness became an emerging field of interest, where science, spirituality, and art intersected in ways rarely seen elsewhere. By the early 2000s, the spiritual engagement with crop circle had become a recognized component of the phenomenon. Pilgrimages, silent dawn gatherings, meditation practices, and personal reflection demonstrated that the impact of crop circles extended beyond visual wonder or scientific curiosity. The circles offered a space where geometry, nature, and perception intertwined, where subtle energy, human attention, and occasional observation by a single UFO or multiple craft seemed to converge. For many, the experience of being present in a field of patterns became transformative, offering insight, calm, and a connection to something far larger than themselves, a dialogue between earth, sky, and the mind. In this way, the spiritual pilgrims helped to broaden the understanding of crop circles, They were not creating the formations, nor primarily concerned with explaining them, but their presence affirmed that these patterns held meaning beyond measurement or spectacle. Through silent observation, movement, and meditation, they highlighted the ways in which geometry, landscape, and human consciousness might intersect, providing an additional dimension to the mystery, one that combined the physical, the perceptual, and the profound sense of wonder that continues to surround these enigmatic formations. Circlemakers and the art movement, when the hoax became ritual performance. While the early history of crop circles was marked by mystery, folklore, and occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft, by the 1980s and 1990s, a new chapter in the phenomenon emerged, one driven by human creativity and ingenuity. This was the era of the Circlemakers, individuals and small groups who deliberately entered fields under the cover of night, armed with boards, ropes, and imagination, transforming the flat surfaces of crops into intricate geometric designs. What began as a simple prank or local curiosity gradually evolved into a form of artistic expression, ritual performance, and social commentary. The first widely acknowledged Circlemakers, a pair of retired men in southern England, demonstrated the potential of the hoax. Their early formations were simple, often modest rings or ovals, designed to be seen from nearby roads or the edges of fields. Over time, however, their designs grew more sophisticated, hinting at the deeper possibilities of geometry, proportion, and pattern. The act of creating a circle became a careful, deliberate process, almost ritualistic in its execution, measuring, plotting, and pacing steps across the field, sometimes over several hours or an entire night, until the design emerged in perfect symmetry under the moonlight. As the movement gained attention, new participants arrived, motivated not merely by humor, but by the challenge of creating ever more complex and visually compelling designs. The tools of the trade, ropes for arcs, boards for flattening stalks, and stakes for reference points, remained remarkably simple, yet the resulting patterns displayed mathematical sophistication that drew the attention of mathematicians, artists, and scientists alike. Spirals, nested polygons, and fractal-based arrangements appeared, designs that seemed impossible to produce without careful calculation, precise execution, and an understanding of scale that exceeded casual artistry. The nighttime creation of crop circles gradually became a kind of performance art. Circlemakers would move quietly through fields, guided by moonlight or subtle illumination, aware that their work might be observed from above by the occasional UFO or even multiple craft. In rare instances, witnesses reported seeing lights lingering in the sky, seemingly pausing as if to watch the progress of the formation below. While these sightings could not be consistently verified, they became woven into the narrative of the practice, adding a layer of mystique that complemented the geometric and aesthetic ambitions of the artists themselves. By the 1990s, the act of circle making had developed into a subculture with its own conventions, challenges, and aesthetics. Some creators sought to replicate natural fractals or sacred geometry, drawing inspiration from spirals found in shells, sunflowers, and galaxies. Others experimented with abstract forms, interlocking patterns, and symbolic arrangements intended to provoke reflection, curiosity, or wonder in those who discovered them. The circles became a canvas, the field a stage, and the night itself an accomplice to the performance. Despite their human origin, the designs often elicited reactions comparable to those produced by the unexplained formations of earlier decades. Observers arriving at dawn were struck by the precision and scale of the patterns, many mistaking them for unexplainable phenomena. Researchers documented anomalies in plant stalks, slight compaction differences, and geometric precision, all of which mirrored the reports from mysterious circles. Occasionally, a single UFO or multiple craft were observed by witnesses, reinforcing the perception of an interaction between human creativity, natural environment, and the unknown. These moments blurred the lines between hoax, art, and potential phenomenon, suggesting that the circles occupied a space that was neither entirely natural nor entirely man-made, but somewhere in between. The emergence of the circle-making art movement also highlighted the role of intention and perception. Some artists sought to inspire awe and reflection, emphasizing beauty, symmetry, and the engagement of viewers' imaginations. Others delighted in the ambiguity, creating formations designed to provoke speculation, sometimes referencing historical, astronomical, or sacred themes. Media coverage, which had once treated crop circles as mysterious anomalies, began to document the artistry, further embedding the phenomenon in popular consciousness. Photographs of intricate patterns spread quickly, inspiring new participants and attracting visitors, turning isolated fields into seasonal destinations for curious observers and spiritual pilgrims alike. In addition to the technical skill involved, the social and ritual aspects of circle making became prominent. Groups would plan formations collaboratively, measuring fields by night, coordinating steps, and using secret codes or marks to track progress. These nocturnal gatherings carried their own sense of ceremony, a rhythm of movement, whispering, and careful calculation that echoed some of the silent pilgrimages observed by spiritual groups. The act of creation itself was as meaningful as the final pattern, a demonstration of human ingenuity, harmonizing with the natural environment. Artists also began to explore the interplay between circles and landscape. Fields near ancient monuments, burial mounds, or sacred routes were chosen deliberately, echoing the patterns seen in naturally occurring or historically noted circles. The placement of a design became part of the message, the performance, and the engagement with history. Viewers, arriving at dawn, were met not only with mathematical elegance, but also with a layered context that tied contemporary artistry to ancient human experience, geography, and culture. Occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft continued to add narrative depth, providing a sense that the night, the land, and the sky were all part of a larger tableau. Over time, the circle-making movement diversified. Some practitioners focused on small-scale designs, subtle interventions in local fields, while others undertook elaborate, large-scale compositions, requiring hours of planning, coordination, and execution. These large formations often stretched over hundreds of meters, revealing spirals, interlocking geometries, and symbolic motifs that could only be fully appreciated from above. The aerial perspective, sometimes coinciding with a witness observing a single UFO or multiple craft, transformed the creation into an ephemeral spectacle, a piece of performance art that existed for a few hours before being harvested or naturally weathered away. Importantly, the art movement emphasized respect for the environment and for the crops themselves. Most circle makers avoided damaging the plants beyond what was necessary to create the pattern, a principle that echoed the reverence shown by spiritual pilgrims. This ethic reinforced the idea that the phenomenon was not simply mischief or vandalism, but a practice intertwined with aesthetics, mindfulness, and interaction with the natural world. The presence of a single UFO, a distant light in the sky, or the occasional observation of multiple craft was interpreted not as a threat, but as part of the ongoing dialogue between land, sky, and human ingenuity. By the early 21st century, the circle-making movement had established itself as a recognized form of contemporary art. Exhibitions, books, and documentaries chronicled the process, while practitioners continued to explore new geometries, materials, and techniques. The interplay between human creation, historical awareness, environmental engagement, and occasional aerial observation ensured that the phenomenon retained its sense of mystery, wonder, and fascination. Crop circles, whether produced by unknown forces or human hands, had become a medium for exploration, of mathematics, of aesthetics, of spirituality, and of the enduring human desire to interact meaningfully with the world around us. The evolution of the art movement demonstrated that the phenomenon of crop circles could not be reduced to a single explanation. It was at once cultural, artistic, scientific, spiritual, and occasionally witnessed by a single UFO or multiple craft. Each formation represented a unique intersection of intention, environment, and imagination, reminding observers that beauty, mystery, and human creativity are often inseparable. In this way, the Circlemakers transformed the fields of southern England and beyond into living galleries, ephemeral theatres where geometry, performance, and the unknown converged beneath the quiet light of night and the early glow of dawn. The Unsolved Signatures, formations still appearing with no explanation. Despite decades of observation, documentation, scientific investigation, and human intervention, the phenomenon of crop circles continues to defy easy explanation. Even in the present day, formations appear overnight in fields across England and around the world, leaving researchers, artists, spiritual seekers, and casual observers alike with the persistent question, how do they come to be? Some patterns are clearly the work of human hands, yet others defy replication, displaying an intricacy, precision, or scale that exceeds conventional capabilities. These unsolved signatures, formations that appear with no clear origin, remain central to the ongoing fascination with the phenomenon. The mystery begins with the sheer diversity of forms. Some circles are simple, singular rings, perfectly pressed into a wheat or barley field. Others are sprawling, intricate arrangements that include interlocking spirals, fractal-based designs, nested polygons, and subtle variations in height, nodal elongation, and stalk orientation that suggest an unseen hand or some unknown influence, moving with deliberate intent. In certain formations, stalks are bent at unusual angles rather than broken, indicating a method of manipulation that is gentle yet precise, leaving the plants alive but altered. This complexity raises questions that neither human skill nor natural processes can fully answer. Observers have noted that some formations appear too quickly and in locations too challenging to access for traditional circlemakers. Remote fields, often isolated by hedgerows, uneven terrain, or water channels, sometimes bear large, highly complex patterns by morning, with no signs of human entry. In these instances, the occasional UFO has been reported, a single craft hovering silently above the formation or moving slowly across the horizon. Rarely, witnesses describe multiple craft, their movements deliberate and observant, sometimes interacting with the geometry below before disappearing into the night. While these sightings are uncommon and fleeting, they add an additional layer of enigma to the phenomenon. The recurring motifs in unexplained formations are also remarkable. Spirals, fractals, and sacred geometry appear repeatedly, not only in England but in Japan, North America, South America, and other regions. This consistency across cultures and landscapes suggests a set of underlying principles governing pattern creation, principles that may be natural, energetic, or even intelligent in origin. Some researchers propose that the formations reflect resonances with the Earth's geomagnetic fields, subtle vibrational energies, or environmental feedback mechanisms. Yet no single explanation has accounted for the full range of observed effects. Environmental anomalies continue to accompany the most perplexing formations. Soil compaction, moisture shifts, and electromagnetic variations have been documented in unexplained circles, sometimes alongside the aforementioned nodal elongation in plants. These measurable traces distinguish certain formations from ordinary trampling or artistic recreation. In rare cases, slight changes in local radiation readings or plant biochemistry have been noted, further challenging conventional understanding. The patterns, then, are not simply visual phenomena, but appear to involve physical interactions with the environment, observable and measurable, yet still without clear explanation of origin. Witness accounts underscore the mysterious nature of these signatures. Early risers often speak of an almost tactile sense of presence in the field, as though the pattern itself exerts a subtle influence on perception. Some describe an uncanny quiet, a stillness that seems to concentrate attention and heighten awareness. Others report feeling small vibrations beneath their feet or a slight tingling in the air, sensations that accompany the visual experience of the formation and echo laboratory studies, suggesting plant and soil responsiveness to energy or vibration. A single UFO is occasionally seen above a newly formed circle, or a few witnesses describe multiple craft hovering at a distance, reinforcing the impression that the field is part of an active, ongoing interaction between land, geometry, and some unobserved agent. Even within areas well documented for human-made circles, certain formations resist attribution. Their precision, scale, or environmental anomalies exceed what is achievable by known circlemakers, or they appear in conditions and locations impractical for nighttime creation. The combination of complexity and subtlety, often paired with minimal human access, leads to speculation that these signatures may be generated by natural processes unknown to modern science, by intelligent forces, or by some interaction between consciousness, energy, and the environment. While the occasional UFO sighting is not consistent enough to be considered causal, it cannot be entirely discounted as a factor in certain cases, particularly when paired with simultaneous environmental anomalies. The enduring fascination with these unsolved signatures lies in their intersection with human curiosity, science, art, and spirituality. They challenge observers to reconsider the limits of perception, creativity, and knowledge. For spiritual pilgrims, the unexplained formations provide sites of contemplation and meditation. For artists, they offer inspiration and a connection to something beyond conventional expression. For scientists, they present puzzles in geometry, physics, botany, and environmental science that resist resolution. And for the general public, they maintain an aura of wonder, suggesting that the world still holds secrets that cannot be neatly explained, catalogued, or predicted. Globalization has intensified the reach of these formations. Photographs, aerial surveys, and online documentation reveal that similar unsolved patterns appear in rice paddies, maize fields, barley, and wheat across multiple continents. In each case, the phenomenon mirrors characteristics first observed in rural England: geometric precision, subtle plant and soil effects, and occasional reports of a single UFO or multiple craft observing the field from a distance. The recurrence of these signatures worldwide reinforces the idea that crop circles are not isolated curiosities, but part of a larger, potentially universal phenomenon whose principles are yet to be fully understood. The mystery persists even as technology advances. Satellite imaging, drones, high-resolution cameras, and environmental sensors have captured new formations in real time, allowing unprecedented observation of their development. Yet, despite these tools, some signatures continue to defy explanation. No observer has fully documented the creation of certain highly complex formations, leaving them classified as unsolved. Each new occurrence rekindles debate, study, and reflection, reminding all who witness them that some mysteries endure, regardless of human ingenuity or technological capability. In essence, the unsolved signatures are the heartbeat of the crop circle phenomenon. They are the formations that resist categorization, defy replication, and inspire awe. Whether influenced by energy, vibration, intelligence, or forces yet unrecognized, these patterns maintain the sense of wonder that has drawn attention for centuries. Occasional sightings of a single UFO, rare observations of multiple craft, environmental anomalies, and the subtle interaction of geometry and living plants all combine to create experiences that are as compelling as they are mysterious. They are evidence that some questions remain unanswered, that some phenomena exist beyond human understanding, and that the world continues to offer experiences that inspire curiosity, reflection, and humility in the face of the unknown. Even in the present day, new formations appear with the same effortless precision and enigmatic elegance as those recorded decades ago. Observers, artists, scientists, and spiritual seekers gather to document, contemplate, and meditate within these patterns. Each encounter unique, each signature a fresh testament to the enduring mystery. The fact that formations persist, that they continue to appear unexpectedly, and that they are sometimes accompanied by fleeting aerial observations, a single UFO or multiple craft, ensures that the phenomenon remains alive, dynamic, and unsolved. These unsolved signatures are the living proof that no matter how much is learned, there will always be corners of the world that resist explanation, inviting wonder and imagination to flourish in the silent fields where geometry and mystery meet. What crop circles mean to us. Mystery as a necessary function of the human spirit. Beyond the patterns, beyond the geometry, and beyond the fleeting glimpses of a single UFO or occasional multiple craft in the night sky, crop circles hold a deeper significance, one that touches the very core of human curiosity and imagination. They are not merely phenomena to be observed, measured, or explained. They are experiences that engage the mind, the senses, and the spirit, reminding us that there are mysteries in the world that endure precisely because they resist resolution. To understand the meaning of crop circles, one must look not only at the fields themselves, but at the way humans interact with them. The wonder, the questioning, the reverence, and the artistry that they inspire. At their most basic, crop circles are invitations. They invite observation, reflection, and imagination. The precise geometry, the delicate bending of stalks, the scale and symmetry, all these elements draw attention and provoke contemplation. Whether one approaches a field as a scientist, an artist, a spiritual pilgrim, or a casual visitor, there is an instinctive response to pause, to look closely, and to consider how such a formation came to exist. In this sense, the mystery itself becomes part of the experience. It is not merely the pattern that matters, but the act of noticing, of engaging with something that defies immediate understanding. Human beings have long been drawn to the unexplained, from ancient megaliths to the night sky, from unexplained lights in the distance to formations in fields. We seek patterns, assign meaning, and imagine causes. Crop circles fit perfectly into this human tendency. They offer evidence that the world contains phenomena that cannot be fully contained by current knowledge, encouraging both humility and curiosity. A single UFO hovering briefly over a field, or multiple craft appearing across the horizon, reinforces the sense that some aspects of reality may lie beyond ordinary perception, waiting to be noticed by those attentive enough to see. The aesthetic and spiritual dimensions of crop circles deepen their impact. Spiritual pilgrims find in these formations a space for contemplation and meditation, a place where geometry and landscape converge to create an almost palpable sense of presence. Artists and musicians draw inspiration from the curves, spirals, and fractals, translating them into works that explore the interplay between structure, creativity, and perception. Scientists and researchers, too, are drawn in, studying anomalies in plant biology, soil chemistry, and subtle environmental effects. Across these perspectives, the circles serve as catalysts for engagement, a reminder that mystery itself can be meaningful. There is also a temporal dimension to their significance. Crop circles appear, persist for a time, and then vanish, either through natural harvesting or weathering. This impermanence echoes many human experiences, moments of insight, encounters with beauty, and flashes of wonder that cannot be held indefinitely. Their transient nature reinforces the lesson that mystery is not something to be conquered, but something to be appreciated in its fleeting presence. Each new formation is an opportunity, a chance to witness, to interpret, and to connect with something larger than oneself. The global spread of crop circles further emphasizes their universal resonance. From England to Japan, the United States to South America, formations evoke similar responses across cultures. The precision, scale, and complexity inspire awe regardless of geographic location, suggesting that the attraction to the mysterious and the sublime is a shared human trait. Observers may encounter a single UFO or multiple craft in these fields, yet whether they do or not, the experience of wonder and contemplation remains consistent. This universality underscores that crop circles are not merely local curiosities, but reflections of a broader human engagement with the unknown. In a cultural context, crop circles also remind us of the interplay between perception, belief, and reality. Stories of circlemakers, hoaxes, unexplained formations, and fleeting aerial phenomena demonstrate that the human mind is both observer and participant in the creation of meaning. Even when a formation is known to be man-made, its impact on perception and imagination can be profound. When the origin is unexplained, the circles elevate the experience to one of open-ended mystery, challenging assumptions and inviting reflection on the limits of knowledge. In every case, they serve as a mirror, revealing as much about human curiosity and creativity as about the formations themselves. There is also a psychological and philosophical aspect to the phenomenon. Encountering a crop circle, whether in person or through photographs, stimulates the imagination, provokes questions, and encourages an openness to possibilities beyond the immediately observable. It is a reminder that human understanding is always partial, that certainty is rare, and that the world retains spaces of genuine wonder. Occasional sightings of a single UFO or multiple craft serve as poignant punctuation in this ongoing dialogue between human awareness and the unknown. They hint that there may be dimensions of reality that elude measurement, yet remain accessible to perception, intuition, and imagination. Crop circles also highlight the importance of patience, observation, and attentiveness. Unlike phenomena that are constant and predictable, these formations demand careful notice. One must arrive in a field at the right time, look closely at the subtle differences in stalks, and attend to the patterns in their entirety. This attentiveness cultivates mindfulness and presence, reinforcing the idea that engagement with mystery is not passive, but active. Witnessing, reflecting, and even meditating within the formations allows participants to experience the world with heightened sensitivity, attuned to nuance, proportion, and the delicate interplay of geometry, environment, and light. At a deeper level, crop circles symbolize the necessity of mystery itself. Humanity thrives on curiosity, creativity, and the pursuit of understanding. But these qualities are energized precisely by the unknown. The patterns in the fields, the fleeting aerial observations of a single UFO or multiple craft, the anomalies in plant and soil, all serve as prompts for inquiry, reflection, and imagination. Without questions to ponder, without enigmas to encounter, the human spirit loses a vital source of vitality. Crop circles, in this sense, are not merely decorative or anomalous. They are functional to human consciousness, sustaining wonder, inquiry, and the search for connection beyond the immediately tangible. The phenomenon also reminds us that observation alone can be transformative. It is not necessary to explain the origin of a formation to benefit from the experience. Simply witnessing the geometry, noting the precision, contemplating the scale, or feeling the subtle interaction of environment and design can evoke awe, reflection, and a sense of communion with something larger than oneself. In this way, crop circles act as catalysts for personal growth, artistic inspiration, and spiritual engagement, regardless of whether their creation is understood. Finally, crop circles challenge the boundaries between human and unknown agency. They are at once natural, human-made, and possibly influenced by forces beyond immediate perception. The presence of a single UFO or multiple craft adds to this layered ambiguity, ensuring that observers remain open to multiple possibilities. Each formation, each pattern, is a reminder that the world contains phenomena that may never be fully explained, yet remain meaningful, beautiful, and capable of inspiring reflection. Mystery is not a deficit in understanding. It is a gift, a vital element of the human experience that fuels curiosity, imagination, and wonder. In conclusion, the meaning of crop circles is inseparable from their mystery. They exist not merely as visual phenomena, but as invitations to engage, contemplate, and reflect. They remind us that some questions are more important than answers, that beauty can exist in ambiguity, and that the human spirit thrives on encounters with the unknown. The fleeting presence of a single UFO, the rare observation of multiple craft, and the enduring elegance of the formations themselves all serve to reinforce this lesson. Crop circles are proof that mystery is necessary, that wonder is vital, and that in fields around the world, silent geometry continues to speak to the enduring curiosity, creativity, and consciousness of humanity. I hope you enjoyed tonight's sleep story, exploring the entire legacy of crop circles, from the earliest whispers of the Mowing Devil in 17th century England to mysterious patterns in rural folklore, the excitement of the 1960s UFO era, the evolution of intricate geometric formations, and the enduring enigma that continues to appear across fields around the world. If you're still awake, that's perfectly fine. Just let your mind drift like soft wind across open fields, where stalks bend gently beneath the moonlight and quiet patterns stretch beyond the horizon. There's no need to hold on to any thoughts now. Let them dissolve like morning mist over the countryside. And if you'd like to continue your journey into rest, you can always explore more of our peaceful sleep stories, from ancient myths and historical mysteries to strange phenomena and hidden legacies, each designed to help you relax and fall gently into deep, restorative sleep. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Wherever you are in the world, I wish you calm, peace, and a night full of quiet wonder. Sleep well.